What's up, y'all? My name is Andrew Heckman. Welcome back to the Meet My Mentor podcast, where I share with you guys the bodies of wisdom that have poured into my life in big and small ways so that you guys can be equipped and inspired to live out your faith on a day-to-day basis. Proverbs 11:14 says that where there is no guidance, a people falls. But in an abundance of counselors, there is safety. So today I'm going to be sitting down with Seth Vandebrooke, who is a huge mentor to me personally. He began freelance coding without a degree, eventually landing him jobs working with the U.S. government. Using his analytical skills, he began researching Bible questions on the side until eventually his passion project became his career. Seth now works as a full-time apologist, researching and answering Bible questions with Cornerstone Chapel. So today we're going to be discussing his journey to full-time ministry, the tension between faith and questioning, and then jumping into some practicals of how can you at home actually seek answers to biblical questions and defend your faith. So I'm super excited for you guys to hear this conversation, and I hope you guys have a meaningful takeaway. Let's jump into it.
Yeah. I met a fellow. His face was yellow. He had big black eyes. He was someone I despised. Didn't like him one bit. He is a bit of a jerk. Every time I saw him, I thought he went to work, but he didn't. He didn't work. I'm describing
Welcome to the podcast.
A smiley face character that doesn't exist, who's apparently a jerk and doesn't do his job.
Oh man,
that was special.
That was very special. That was a great way to get started.
Are you gonna include that?
Maybe.
That would be crazy.
Oh man. All right. Let me pull up my notes here. Seth Vandebrooke.
Hello.
Seth Vandebrooke.
Andrew.
Nephilim enthusiast.
Oh.
Professional Bible question answer, and a huge mentor to me personally. Thank you for making the time to be here.
Happy to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
I would like to take a moment here at the beginning to just acknowledge God in this conversation. So would you join me for a prayer real quick? Father, thank you so much for this opportunity to just have this conversation. I pray that the wisdom would just reach ears that it needs to reach, and that you would just use this to spread your word into the world. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right. So, Seth, there are a lot of Christian apologists out there, especially on the internet, answering Bible questions. What unique perspective do you think that you bring to the table?
Hopefully nothing.
Can you expound on that a little?
If I'm coming up with something original, I'm causing problems. As someone who's trying to speak the truth of Scripture, we joke about this at the office. Like, if I'm coming up with something new, I'm doing something wrong, right? If I'm going to come up with something new, let's say in a sermon, the only thing that should be new is the analogy. If I'm coming up with new truth, that's a new gospel, and that's not good. And even with teaching apologetics or just answering a question, the only thing that should be new is the way you're explaining it, not the thing you're explaining, right? Unless, if it's science, if it's not about Scripture, okay, fine, right? But if it's about Scripture, I don't want to come up with anything new.
Do you think then that on the way that you approach answering Bible questions, is there a way that maybe other people don't hit on it as much, or something in your life, an experience that you bring to the table that might inform the way that you go about doing it that maybe is a little bit unique to you?
Yeah, so I'm taking that as, what makes me unique in the way that I do what I do. It's hard to say. Because to answer that question, I would have to know what people appreciate about the way that I do it. I don't know what they would say. From just some of the things that I have heard, I think I explain things differently than a lot of people explain things. but that's good and bad. that means a lot of people aren't going to understand it the way I'm explaining it, and some people will. But that's part of why the church has so much diversity. That's why, Paul talks about how we should have diversity in the body of Christ, because we do different things. And even if I'm doing the same thing, I might do it differently. How do I do it differently? Yeah, I talk about things differently than other people would in terms of perspective and vocabulary that's maybe a little just bit older. I'm influenced by reading old things. And so by reading a lot of old literature, I just talk differently. But I try my best to make it relatable, and at least that works to some extent, I believe. But in general, I'm just incredibly analytical. And so that tends to work better for apologetic-like things. I'm incredibly logical, like I'm smart. But I'm logical in the sense that it's hard for me to say something that's just a result of emotion as much. I, growing up, had a really hard time understanding anything that was like an innuendo or even metaphors, analogies, idioms, because I was too literal. And so I had to learn how to not be as literal. But that literal, very logic-focused way of thinking helps a lot when you're trying to actually break things down, because when someone asks a question, they almost always ask it incredibly vaguely. Or they'll essentially say something along the lines of topic, problem, help, right? And it's like, okay, well, let's break that down algebraically. What exactly is the issue? What are the things that are sticking out to you as the actual problem? And now how can we break that down Socratically? So I guess to sum that up, I'm bringing the things that I learned in software engineering and analytical work to a conversationally appealing medium.
Yeah, thank you. I think what stuck out to me there was the word apologetics, because I think some people may not know what that word means. So can you explain, what is apologetics? Is it just apologizing to people for, stealing something from them?
Yeah, no. So apologetics actually just means to defend something. And it's not unique to Christianity. You can be an apologist of lots of things. But in general, that word has really taken a lot more root in Christendom. We get this from Peter, who's saying, hey, be prepared to give a defense for the things that you believe in, for where you place your hope. And that's not for just one type of person. So an apologist isn't supposed to be a type of person in the church originally. It's really for everyone. Everyone's supposed to be able to give a defense. I think it's actually perhaps sad that we've reduced apologetics to something that is only for the scholarly. Everyone's supposed to be able to give a defense for the hope that they have in Christ, right? Now, sure, they're going to be more scholarly people, and maybe they're going to do a better job than somebody else. But in general, apologetics isn't just the defense of the Christian faith. It's actually just an aspect of the calling of Christ.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, that First Peter 3:15 verse, the Greek word that it actually uses there is apologia.
Correct. That's where we get the word.
Which is where we get the word apologetics. So, simple, short, one sentence definition, go.
Of apologetics?
Yeah.
Defending the faith.
Great. So, then I guess the question that arises from that is, well, why is it important to be able to defend the faith, to give reasoned answers to people's questions about the Bible? Is having faith not enough, Seth?
Having faith isn't enough to convince someone.
Okay. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. If I tell you should believe something, and you ask me why, and I say because I believe something, that's not a good argument. That's not enough. In apologetics, I'm gonna give you a reason other than because I believe. Right? Because that's not it's not convincing. It's not a good argument in the first place. If I base everything off of, well, I believe in Jesus, so you believe in Jesus. That's like, well, I believe in yellow cows, so you should believe in the yellow cows. Like, why? That's not an actual reason to believe. If someone just tells me I should believe in Buddha, I'm gonna say, well, what's your reason? Well, I believe in him. That's not a good reason, right? But if you tell me, well, actually, you should follow Christ because he is who he claimed he was, which is God, because he did die and he did make a way for you to not just have everlasting life, but to live a life of purpose and meaning, and to live a life that is centered around love. Well, now you've given me a reason, but I'm probably going to have more questions. And that's the rest of apologetics.
On a personal level, beyond sharing with other people, I think I've found an impact in my own life personally of exploring these answers. And part of that is just as a personality. Like I'm a question asker. I was the why kid when I was little.
I know.
But for somebody personally who maybe they have inherited generational faithfulness of God, who they haven't really thought through, is there actually evidence, deep evidence for what I believe? I think that there may be this misconception that the more evidence I have, the less faith that I have. Can you explain that balance a little bit?
Yeah, it's not that you have less faith, it's that you need less faith. And for a lot of people, that sounds wrong. Like, oh man, but I'm supposed to need all the faith in the world. You actually know. What did Jesus say when disciples asked, oh, increase our faith? He said, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say, hey, plant, uproot, and go be planted in the ocean. That's what he said. It's like the amount is not necessary. You don't need some massive amount of faith. That's what his point was. So you just need it. If you have faith and you act in that faith boldly, that's what I'm looking for. That's what Jesus was saying. He's like, no, you don't need a mountain's worth. You need a tiny little mustard seed. That's all you need. And so that's, I would say that first, right? It's okay to say that you don't need a massive amount of faith. You just need faith. But as for, why it should matter, it's important to have faith in Jesus Christ. That's where we get salvation, right? But in terms of knowing why, in terms of understanding, I'm not a follower of Jesus Christ because it feels like it makes sense. There is so much evidence for it. Logic, history, science, philosophy, they all point to Jesus being who he said he was. And I don't need to have a lot of faith in order to be saved. But now that I am saved because of the evidence, my faith increases. And it's kind of poetic in a way, right? It's not necessary to come to the realization that Jesus is who he says he is through faith alone. I can come to that conclusion with all the evidence. But once I actually act on faith to follow Christ, not just knowing that he's real, but to follow him, now I'm saved. And now that I'm saved and I have all the evidence for it, well, doesn't that bolster your faith? I mean, when I look at a chair and I say, okay, I believe that it will hold me up. I'm believing in it. I'm not actually active in my faith, but I have faith that'll hold me up. Once I sit in it, not only do I have faith in it, but my faith is going through the roof because I'm like, well, yeah, it's holding me up now. Why would it stop holding me up tomorrow, right? And as it continues to do that, my faith is increased. And I'm going to think less and less every time I sit on that same chair that it's actually going to, fall through the floor, right? So not only is evidence good and important, it actually just increases the faith.
So you wouldn't say that they're opposite sides of a balance scale, but more they are
complementary
vectors moving in the same direction, parallel vectors.
I'd say they're mutually supportive.
Okay.
They're mutually supportive. There are only vectors pointing in the same direction if your faith is placed in the right thing.
I guess the refute to that some people might bring up is doubting Thomas. It's this unfortunate name to get stuck with in history.
Yeah, it's a bummer. Poor guy.
Thomas comes to Jesus after him being resurrected. And people are telling Thomas, like, he's resurrected. We saw him. And Thomas is like, until I see his hands and his feet from the crucifixion, I'm not believing it. And when Jesus comes to him, he shows him his hands, his feet, lets him put his hands on them, feel them. And what he says is, blessed are,
now
you
that
believe
you see me,
because you have seen, but blessed are those who believe yet have not seen.
Mm-hmm.
How would you address that?
What do you mean? How would I address it?
In relation to faith and evidence, because he says, blessed are those who believe but have not seen. And people have this concept of blind faith.
Mm-hmm.
Blind faith is a good thing. We should have blind faith in God. How would you speak to that?
Yeah, similar to the last answer in terms of blind faith is good. It's just not necessary in order to come to belief, right? So, others believed and didn't see. I haven't seen him physically, right? And I believe, and that's great. Thomas got to see him and believe, and that's great. So both are valid options, right? So you can come to the same conclusion via evidence or through faith. I mean, for so many people for so long, they didn't have all the evidence that we have now. They didn't understand so much about science and how that supports Christ, not just Christ, but the whole story of the Bible. They didn't know as much about history and how that supports everything about the Bible. They didn't know as much about philosophy and how that supports everything about the Bible, right? They didn't have all that information, but they still had the right answer. And so faith and evidence, right, if they're pointing in the same direction, they do mutually support one another. And Thomas was on one end of that spectrum. And I respect the guy. I'm really big on evidence. I'm really big on logic. I'm really big on show me, don't just tell me, right? There's nothing wrong with that to some degree, right? The sad thing was that he didn't believe his best friends. I mean, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the more the thing people are like, shame on you, right? Like your best friends were telling you this and you're like, really? You think consider this. One of your best friends passes away, right? You've spent 3 years hanging out with all the buddies, and the 13 of you have just been hanging out. One of them passes away. Someone comes up and is like, "Oh, he's alive." It's like, don't be a jerk. Like, don't throw me around. And it's like, no, I would never. Who would? That's a cruel joke, right? Yeah. And Thomas knows that. He there's no way he's like, because he doesn't. What he doesn't say is, "Stop pulling my leg." He knows they're not joking. He knows they're not joking, which means he knows they're being serious, but he didn't believe them. And that's the sad thing is you look at Thomas, like, dude, why didn't you believe your best friends? But you know what isn't mentioned in the Bible, but might be a very real possibility?
What is that?
He was too afraid to believe because he was heartbroken. And I think there are a lot of people like that. They don't want to believe that it's true because of what it might mean. Or they don't want to try to believe that it's true only to fall flat in their face if it's false. They don't want to have to go through actually. Okay, so I know this guy.
Okay.
I won't say who he is, but he for a long time was like wanted to believe that aliens existed. And he was like, I think they exist. And then he did all this studying. He's like, I don't think they exist. And after a while, stuff started coming out about UFOs and all this whatever. And he's been one of the biggest deniers because he's like, I want it to be real so bad. I don't want to be disappointed again. So I don't believe it. And oddly enough, we can do this. We can do this with Christianity. You can do it with, aliens. You can do it with anything, right? Where it's like, okay, I actually do want it to be real. And it's because I want it to be real that I'm actually worried about being wrong. And I'm worried about what the consequences would be of being wrong if I believe this thing that I or society deem to be crazy. It's one thing if you have an absolute guarantee that you're right, you'll probably be more bold about it. But if you're concerned, like Thomas was, like, what if it's wrong? I don't want to play the part of the fool, right? Who wants to play the part of the fool? And that's what, in some way, we can say Thomas was concerned about. He didn't want to play the part of the fool. He's like, I'm not going to believe that until I see it for myself. Now, the amazing thing is, unlike so many people for thousands of years, now we have so much evidence, you can get 98, 99% of the way just on, a Thomas approach, just on, well, show me the evidence. And while that isn't preferable, perhaps, in the sight of God, where he wants you to just believe and trust him, he's not a jerk. He's not like, no, I'm not going to let you see the evidence. Just trust me. Just believe me with no proof. Actually, every time the Lord's like, trust me, he's always giving evidence for it. He's constantly giving proof. He's like, believe me because I've been faithful thus far. Right? It's like, I'm giving you the evidence. I'm giving you the proof. And look at Jesus. It's God himself. His response was, okay, I'll show you, Thomas. It wasn't, no, I need you to believe blindly. The answer was, okay, I'll show you the evidence. I'll show you the proof. But guess what? for those who believe and don't even see this evidence, man, those guys are blessed.
Yeah, I wrote in my journal one time, faith often isn't just believing things that you haven't seen or believing things that you haven't seen yet. It's often believing what you have seen.
Mm-hmm. There's something to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of the times, decisions to believe are volitional, right? They're not evidence-based.
What does volitional mean?
Volitional means of the will, right? So I decide to because I want to. So I'm not going to believe that because I don't want to, or I am going to believe that because I want to. It's not based on evidence. It's based on what I want. It's based on my will, right? And so oftentimes we'll see the evidence in front of us, we'll see the data, we'll see the facts, and we'll deny it. And we do this with all sorts of things on small scales and big scales. We do that because it's a volitional decision. It's like, I don't care what the evidence is. This is what I believe. And everyone loves accusing other people of doing it and never admits that they're the ones who do it, but we all do it. We all do it, right? Even if it's, oh, I've already looked into that, so I do know the answer, but I just don't feel like looking at the evidence that you're presenting. It's still a form of that, right? Where you're denying, I refuse to examine the evidence because I've already decided. And that's what a lot of people can do without examining any evidence ahead of time. Normally, we pick what we want, not what we believe is really true.
Yeah. I like how Frank Turek puts it. He says that a lot of people are on a happiness quest, not a truth quest.
Mm-hmm.
They're not looking for what's true. They're just looking for whatever will get them the next dopamine hit.
But if you ask them, they'll tell you they're looking for what's true. Not everyone, but most people would say, well, of course I want to know what's true. Of course, these days, a lot of people don't believe truth exists.
Yeah. Well, Seth, what is a time that you remember this skill of apologetics, of being able to give reasoned answers for the Bible, having a meaningful impact?
A meaningful impact? All the time. I mean, the best ones are when I'm, at a youth camp or whatever, sitting down with a high schooler who doesn't want to go in and listen to the worship and the sermon, and I sit down and ask what's going on. They start hammering me with these questions. Well, why should I believe this in the first place? Doesn't science disprove God? Well, what about all this, evolution theory? Well, what about, and they start throwing all these science questions or throwing all these philosophical questions. I'm like, oh, let's go. That's my bread and butter. Let's talk. And it's the best to sit there and to help someone think it through for themselves. Because it's not about proving anybody right. That's just rude. It's about having a conversation with someone and helping them think something through. Because as a Christian, you love the person and you want to help them come to the conclusion. You don't shy away from answers that are difficult, right? So, there's so many times that I can think of like that, where I get to have an awesome conversation with someone who's genuinely looking for the truth, asking really good, hard questions. And after hearing the answers, go, okay, I'm ready to go in now. I think I'm ready to give this a shot. That's what's more rewarding. Probably one of the most impactful ones was when I was in Guatemala, speaking through a translator. I'm not that good at Spanish. And having an incredibly difficult conversation with, there's a big group of us, but there was this young lady who, teenager, and she lost her brother. And she was like, I want to believe that this God exists, and I want to believe he's good, but how can I believe in a good God if this God is real and he allowed my brother to die the way he died? And I was like, do you want to hear the answer? She was like, please. And so I shared with her and I walked her through Matthew 13, and we talked about how Jesus explains that suffering is allowed to exist because humans cause suffering, and to get rid of it, he has to get rid of us. But he loves us too much to do that. The suffering is allowed to persist because we're allowed to persist. He allows suffering because he loves us. And as I will give a much longer answer than that. And as we walked through that, And as I shared about my many experiences of loss, right? My mother passing away, my uncle passing away, my cousins passing away, a lot more people than just that, and how that affected me. And I'm like, I understand maybe not what you're going through, but I understand grief and I understand these questions, and these are good, important questions. At the end of answering the questions that followed, I asked her, do you realize that God loves your brother more than even you can? And if he loves him that much, think about how much he wants you to make the right decision so you can be with him for the rest of eternity. Do you want to follow Jesus so you can have that relationship? And she said yes. And I was floored. I was like, no way. Like, she heard that, she received that in a matter of a 15-minute conversation. She was not just like reluctantly accepting it. She was crying tears of joy. And I asked if anybody else wanted to, and her friend was like, I'm in. It was incredible. So, I mean, that's probably up there, right? Those moments where from answering hard questions and having simple but important conversations, people give their lives to Christ. They realize that once you are able to acknowledge that there is a logical explanation, that you don't have to be some irrational person to follow Jesus. You run out of reasons not to. Once those barriers are gone, the heart longs to have that relationship with God. We have a God-shaped hole. And once those barriers are out of the way, you just go running into his arms.
Wow. God is so good, dude.
Amen.
Thank you for sharing that story. That is very encouraging. And I think that that's a comforting reminder for those logical people out there that it's okay for them to ask questions. God's not afraid of their questions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before we talk about more how to give answers and our approach to giving answers to these questions, I like to start by first reflecting on how do we ask the right questions, because I believe it starts there.
How do we ask the right questions?
Yeah.
You contemplate. It's a lost skill. Take a second. Take your jacket off. Stay a while. Contemplate and ask the question behind the question. Right? I mean, everybody knows that like annoying type of kid. Why? Well, because of this. Why? Well, because of this. Why? Well, because of this. Why? Just because. Okay, that you keep asking why. I was that kid.
I was also that kid.
Yeah. Oh man, drove everybody nuts.
Yep.
And probably still do. But when you keep asking those questions and you go deeper and deeper, you find your way towards the important questions, because superficial questions are all over the place. But you're able to recognize an important question by the impact that it has. Right? I think often about the definition of power. What is power? It's the potential for change, right? It's like potential energy. So if it's kinetic, well, you're literally expending it right now. Now you don't have it anymore. Congratulations, you have no power. No, the power is really this. It's potential energy. It's sitting there. It's waiting. And when you have a larger potential for change, you have a larger amount of power. And it's sad that power has become such a negative word in so many ways. But the important questions have a lot of power. Why? Because they have the biggest potential for change in your life. An important question has an answer that will significantly change the way that you live your life. And sometimes the question itself is so powerful, it can change your life before you find the answer. Simply because it causes you to think further. It causes you to dig, and in the process of digging, you learn skills you didn't realize you needed.
Are there any bad questions?
Bad questions. I would struggle to define a bad question. But I suppose it would have to work in opposition to something good.
Okay. Do you think that there's maybe some poorly formulated questions? Because I think sometimes when people ask me questions, I'll be like, well, let's first define our terms, because in the question, you're defining a term as something that it's not. So are there like some ways to identify maybe a poorly formulated question?
Yeah, I mean, normally it's that the question is based on poorly formulated logic. That tends to be the issue. Poorly formulated logic, or I suppose just linguistic misuse, meaning you're using the words wrong. It's not how you intended. Are you looking like for examples?
Yeah, I'm thinking of like if somebody asks you a question, sometimes the question itself is the problem, where they're maybe asking the wrong question. And I think what you see sometimes Jesus doing, and you, I think, described this earlier, is somebody comes to you with something vague and you're trying to get to and piece it apart into what's the core issue here.
Yeah, so I guess in that way, you're defining the wrong question as an unhelpful question.
Yes.
Right? So it's like, okay, well, that's not helpful, which is normally context-based. Because in a different conversation, maybe that is the helpful question. But in this conversation, the goal that we're aiming at is not aligned with or supported by the answer to the question that you're asking. I mean, what you said makes me think of the rich young ruler, right? His question was, how do I obtain everlasting life? Well, that's a good question he starts off with, right? But Jesus, he takes that good and important question, so it actually wasn't bad. But he took the unhelpful heart that was behind it. He saw past even a decent question and was looking more at the posture of the heart and was like, well, do you know the law? He said, well, sure. Should you hear all the rules? I've followed all the rules. No, you haven't. Immediately no. But Jesus is like, okay, totally. Which, by the way, this is such a good blueprint for how to handle conversations. Here this guy's asking a question not in good faith. He's coming to flaunt how great he is, and he's not looking to change. We know that because he doesn't, right? He's not looking to change. He's looking to flaunt how great he is. And so he comes up and he's like, oh, yes, I know all the laws and I follow them. And Jesus says, that's awesome. He takes him at his word, even though Jesus is Jesus and he knows it's not true. He takes him at his word for it, right? Face value. Man, that's awesome. Go and sell everything that you have and follow me. Same command, by the way, he said to all the disciples.
Yeah.
But he doesn't follow them. Proof that God wasn't forcing them, right? They got to decide. So he says, yeah, sell everything you have and follow me. The guy walks away sad, right? And it's not even because his question was formed poorly, right? It's actually because the posture of his heart was misaligned with the question. That's a level of which most people don't acknowledge. That, one, I'd argue most questions really aren't bad questions. They may not be helpful to the goal of the conversation. But as a Christian apologist, when you're handling questions, you're trying to look past all that. You're trying to ask a more important question back to the inquirer. What's your motivation? Why do you ask that question? What are you looking to get out of this conversation? Because if you're seeking, some good thing, I want to understand what that is and help you reach that. If you're seeking something wrong, I'm not going to be able to help you, right? So I would argue that most questions really aren't bad. They might be unhelpful, but when you're trying to pick apart something that someone's asking, don't just pick apart the question. Try to see past that and see why the question is being asked.
I think that leads perfectly into my next question of what is the role of questions in answering questions about the Bible? Because like we just talked about, Jesus, who had access to all the answers, it shows in the biblical historical records of like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I look at them and there's a remarkable amount of times where when Jesus is asked a question, instead of answering the question directly, asks a question right back. So how do we utilize questions
in those conversations? The goal, and Jesus is doing this each time, is to help them reevaluate and reformulate their question, because we rarely ask the right question first. Most of us, even in conversation, we're stumbling our way through, right? And that doesn't just mean stuttering or whatever. That means we're not quite sure what we mean yet, but as we're talking about it, we're figuring it out. And it's like writing. Anybody who writes, you're writing and you realize you don't know where you're going when you get there somehow. And you're like, this was cool. I never thought I'd be here, right? It's this journey of discovery. And that's what most conversations are. And the role or the job of the person who has the answers the other person is seeking for is to help them along that journey. And you don't help them along that journey with answers. That's the destination. To help along the journey, you have to help them ask questions that will get them to the answer they're looking for. And it could be like, that's just a bunch of baloney. Like, just tell them the answer. But again, as a Christian apologist, you're not looking to just give an answer. You're looking to help the person. Should I give a man a fish? Answer. Or should I teach them how to fish? Questions. As I ask more pointed questions that help them along the way, I'm helping them think how to think it through for themselves and come to the conclusions on their own. Jesus was doing that, and that's what we should do.
You talked about this journey that each of us are on. I would like to go back and kind of trace some of your journey, because I know for me as a Y kid, that has shaped so much of my journey in how I approach these conversations with other people who have these questions. So let's rewind a little bit. What role did asking questions play in your life at a young age?
Annoying my parents. I have great parents, but what role did it play? It guided everything. I mean, I was swimming in questions and very few answers. And oddly enough, I don't know that I was really frustrated by that. I was just incredibly inquisitive. And boy, was I excited when I found out how to find the answers. Yeah, I was on top of the world and have been since. But how that shaped my younger life, it caused me to spend more time contemplating. I mean, because I was not an iPad kid. I did not grow up with an iPad or an iPhone. I grew up playing with sticks and rocks.
Let's go.
And I was the kid who is categorizing the sticks and rocks. I was like, these look like these ones, and these look like those ones. My mom was like, you're going to be a scientist or something. It's close enough, right? Software engineering. But hey, so I was the kid who's messing around with that stuff, right? I wanted to understand the world, right? And I was, I was trying to figure out what my 10-year plan was at age 6, right? That's the kind of, nerd that I was from the beginning. But I didn't have right away. I didn't have access to the internet. I didn't have all this awesome stuff that's available today. So I was just me, which meant all I had was to think, right? And then we had some books, but I was dyslexic and I did not feel like reading. So I just thought a lot. And I asked questions from other people, right? Well, what about this? What about that? But for a long time, it's not like I was like, I became an apologist at age 7, right? Like, no, I just kept asking questions. But honestly, the way that ended up forming and maturing into something that was actually useful was when I finally started reading and writing intentionally. And as I did, I was forming thoughts better, plain and simple. I was starting to realize why things made sense as I was thinking it through and writing my words down and rewriting them. I was taking notes. I was paying more attention to the things I was learning, and things just started clicking for me. And I realized that all of this information was useful in some way or another, and I didn't need to know right away how it was useful. I just need to learn it and see how it connected to something later on. And that turned me into a sponge. And I've been sponging ever since.
So timeline-wise, when did that start happening in your life?
I started sponging pretty quickly. I don't know, preteens. Okay. But I didn't solidify that into a process of consistently reading and writing, taking notes until I was like 20. Yeah, somewhere around 20. And then maybe 19, I don't know, around there. And once I actually turned that into a process and a habit and a discipline, that's when it went from, I've learned a lot of these weird and random facts. And I was that kid who growing up was just like, well, actually, just rattling off facts and things that I had learned. It went from knowing random facts to all of a sudden someone who could synthesize helpful information that was beneficial to society. And all of a sudden, people started wanting to have conversations. People started wanting to ask questions because I didn't just know random things. I was actually able to give useful answers to useful questions, right? And I was able to formulate those things better because I had sat down, I had spent 20, 30, 40 minutes thinking about it and asking not just the question, but the question behind the question, getting an answer and saying, how do I know it's true? Okay, you claim that this is what happened at this point in time in this history book. How do I know that happened? How on earth do I know? I'm just blindly having faith in this history book written by 12 dudes in an attic somewhere. Like, how am I supposed to trust? Most of the time it's not 12 dudes, it's like one. And it's like, okay, here's a summary. Basically, this is what happened. I'm like, what? That's not history. That's a whole other topic. But it was around that time, somewhere around my 20th year of life, that I started actually synthesizing clear thoughts that became useful, as opposed to just asking the questions, which is the first step, but it's not useful yet, right?
Yeah. So what I gather from that is there's a difference between being able to give an answer to certain questions and being the type of person who can answer those questions.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And a lot of it comes down to, a classic example is someone like Jordan Peterson, right? Where he spends a lot of time reading and even more time thinking about what he read, right? Mm. You don't just suddenly have these, jaw-dropping ideas or scandalous ideas and controversial ideas, right? Because you read a book. You end up being someone that people want to talk to because you read the book and you thought about it. And because you thought about it, you remember it, it becomes a part of who you are. And when you do that, the amazing, how this clicked for me one time, I don't even know what year this was. I heard Jocko Willink. I don't know if you know Jocko Willink, but he's an ex, not just Navy SEAL, but Navy SEAL commander. And he did these amazing things, look him up. But he made this comment at some point on some video or podcast that I was listening. I think it was his podcast. And so this wasn't even all that long ago, a couple years ago. And he said, when you read a book, you can have a mentor in any field. You can learn from the best of any field. That person can be your mentor. And I was like, that's so true. I can literally have the greatest minds in history be my mentors, and I don't even have to agree with all of them. And that was awesome because I had already been reading at that point. I had already been searching for answers. But that was huge because then I realized, wait a second, first off, that's true for Jesus. He's my immediate mentor, not some remote whatever, right? He's my immediate mentor. But more than that, well, not more than that. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Yes. But also, right, yes. in a different, category, I can learn from all of the greatest minds throughout history, aside from the best, which is Jesus, right? So essentially I can hear from all the second rate, right? But I can learn from people who shaped the world. Why is that important? Because then I can finally understand the world I live in. So now I can learn from people like, Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, and I can learn from people that have shaped the world in negative ways. People like Machiavelli, Hitler, whoever, right? What if I learn from the people who have changed the world so I can actually understand the world I live in without, the question there is, but then how do I do that in a way that doesn't negatively impact me? It's like, well, the same way you do the good thing. You sit there, you think about it, you work through it, you see what makes sense and what doesn't, right? And you're fine. You'll be okay. You're not going to magically get corrupted because you read something from this guy who's obviously wrong, right? So that was huge for me. And that is what shifted me into the type of person that people wanted to ask questions for, because they're like, oh, you've learned from those greatest minds. You've read those things. It's not you saw a video that said this, right? It's not that you read a book that told you it was true. It's you read the book by that ancient historian. You read Histories by Herodotus. You read Antiquities of the Jews by Flavius Josephus, right? Like you've read, Homer's works, so you understand how those do and don't line up with what Old Testament literature is talking about, right? So when you read those primary sources for yourself, well, actually now you're a somewhat useful source, as opposed to, well, I heard Joe who heard from Jill who heard from Jack, right? And that's just not as helpful.
Where's the starting point for that? Because I think it can be very difficult for some people who it's like, reading's not my thing, to do that, or writing's not my thing. I don't really like to write. I just have ChatGPT do all my papers for me. What's the starting line for that? The entry point, or what is a spark for that person?
Well, first spark I'll give you is hopefully just the revelation that you're not going to become someone different and better by staying the same. I hope that's obvious, but it's true. It's like, well, but I don't want to do those things. Okay, you don't get to be that person. Oh, I want to play in the NBA. Okay, are you going to practice hard? No. Well, sorry, you don't get to go, right? It's like, well, if you want to be someone who thinks and who has answers, well, think and find the answers, right? Just do the work. So where's the starting place? This is going to sound like a cop-out. Wherever you want. What do you want to know? What is your question? If your question is, how do I know if evolution is true or creation is true? You have a bunch of starting places. Gee, unlike most people who argue for evolution, actually read what Darwin said. I don't understand why in so many conversations with people who argue for evolution, none of them are quoting Darwin. Why? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because by his own definition, it isn't true anymore. But read what he said, right? Read what he said. And now let's read the Bible, see what that said, and let's compare the two. Easy starting place, right? But again, I mean, the advice I would give is just don't let your starting place be second-hand information. Why? Because you instantly get bias. You instantly get interpretation from that person. And then when you read it, you hear someone saying, and this is why, Darwin is wrong, or this is why the Bible is wrong. And you're like, oh, that's why they're wrong. No, double check everything they're saying, right? So start wherever you want, but preferably something primary, and double check everything that matters to you. And then from then on, I mean, seriously, read whatever you want. What's impactful to you? What are your questions? Ask those questions and start there. Well, I really want to get answers about, astrophysics. How do I understand how this relates to whatever, right? Where do I start? Google the most influential books on astrophysics. You'll get a result. Read those books. It doesn't have to be complicated. Start somewhere. What's more important is the way that you start, which is seeking for primary sources to see that person actually said that thing, right? And who those influential people in that field are. And then double check. And that means, what does that look like? It's like, well, if I read a book that is secondary and they're saying, Alexander the Great did this, said this. Well, read other sources on Alexander the Great. Are you sure he did that? What you'll find in most academic fields is that people are disagreeing left and right. And you're going to have to figure it out for yourself. Well, I'm going to have to go track down that manuscript or what. Like, are you going to be that guy? Are you going to be that girl who goes all the way and is going to say, I'm going to find that manuscript online, because most of them are online these days. I'm going to find that manuscript online and I'm going to look at what it really says, and I'm going to talk to a professor and get him to show me in this language that's actually what that means. Like, how far are you willing to go? Because if you go all the way, you'll be rock solid, right? But most people, it's not always that they don't know where to start. It's that they don't really want to put in the work. So my advice, start with those things, put in the work. You'll go way further than you think you will.
So reading primary sources, reflecting on them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that reflection piece is key. I've learned that when I don't reflect on the things that I'm consuming, I don't actually end up doing anything with the knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I get a lot of the knowledge, but none of the wisdom, none of the action.
Exactly.
And at that point, it's just a waste. And I think in such an information age, which I would love to come back to this and later in the conversation, but in such an information age, we have a lot of knowledge, but not a lot of action, is what I observe.
This is part of why people like podcasts and things like this. It's because they're not looking for information anymore. They're looking for insight. And insight doesn't come from information. It comes from people, which is why they want to hear a conversation. And this is why the Greeks met the way they did. They'd all meet up in these either big rooms or they'd meet outside or, an amphitheater, and they would share thoughts. And that's part of why they became such a pretty impressive civilization and shaped the whole Western world, because they talked. They sat down, they thought about things, and they talked about things. And then they thought about it more, and they talked about it more, and they thought about it more, and they talked about it more. Before you know it, those thoughts revolutionized the world. And that's all we can do. We search, we find what answers we can, we talk about it. And that's how humans have continued to reshape the world over and over again, through thought and, of course, technological innovation. But so to repeat that, right? It's to read primary sources, to reflect on it and to double check.
So before we get to actually how do we answer these questions, I want to go back to your story. So you are reading now, reflecting, you're double checking through your teens. Walk me through the career path of now, how did you get to answering Bible questions for a living?
Hey, it's just weird, and it's not conventional, and it's one of those I didn't earn or deserve to be doing what I'm doing now. I, at a young age, started writing code, and very quickly started freelancing writing code, and then right out of high school, I get a job writing code, and then I get another job writing code, and I just start writing code, just writing code all over the place. That's what it did. For over a decade, I was writing code, and I was doing cybersecurity and software engineering and working with big systems, and I did that for private sector and public sector and nonprofits and for-profits, and I bounced all over the place, right? And it was amazing, and I loved it. I was passionate about it. Yeah, logic, right? I was passionate about it. I still am. I love it. I still do it on the side for other nonprofits. But, how on earth does that land you a job at answering Bible questions full time, right? And researching history in the Bible. It doesn't. Those things don't necessarily connect, although they might philosophically. I was spending the time doing the work for myself. I didn't think I would be doing any of this, right? Just looking for the answers for myself. People started asking me questions because I was finding them. Before you know it, kind of formed my own little ministry without trying, right? People are asking me a bunch of questions on social media, in person, on email, whatever. I start a blog because I'm like, this is going to take too long for me to explain it to you. So I got to write all this down. So I write it down and try to condense the 2-3 hour conversation down into a 15-minute read or whatever. That starts doing well. I start going on podcasts, things start getting crazy. And then before I know it, I just randomly get a phone call. And it's not because of anything I did. It's just the Lord called me. And he told me years ago he was calling me to full-time ministry, but it was 8, almost 9 years before it happened. And I took the good advice of a good friend who said, hey, just focus on where God has you today. He'll guide, and then he'll guide you to where he has you, right? Okay, if he has me over there, I will get over there, as long as I focus on where I'm at right now. And so that's what I did. I just focused on learning and finding the answers to the questions I had. And before I knew it, years later, before I knew it, I just got a phone call saying, hey, would you like to work at our church answering these Bible questions? I was like, there's no way you asked me to do that. That's crazy, right? I don't have the education in that, right? I'm a computer nerd. Like, why would you have me do that? But of course I accepted because I knew the Lord was confirming, yes, you had no idea, but this is what I was turning you into for this, because this was my plan. And I was like, this is crazy. I was blown away. So it's just the Lord. And it's just such a strong encouragement and reminder that As we say a lot of the time, right, at Cornerstone Chapel, it's like the Lord doesn't just call the equipped, he equips the called. And that's what he did. He called me, and then he equipped me. And now this is what I do. Completely different from the trajectory I was on.
Let's go. All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk about answering Bible questions. So, Seth, before the break, we were talking about becoming the type of person who can answer biblical questions. And we walked through some of your journey with that. But now moving to the practicals of how do we actually go about developing answers for these questions and the interactions that we have when people come to these questions or come to us with these questions. So let's start on developing answers to these questions. What is your process that you formed for doing that?
Well, the question obviously shapes the process for the answer. Most of the things that I'm looking into are biblical, and thus theological, or historical, or maybe some form of philosophical and scientific. I mean, those four things tend to come up the most. And so let's just say, well, here's this question this person has about this passage of the Bible. I mean, the thing is, Bible is a complex beast. So that could mean anything from my process is going to look like, using biblical dictionaries, encyclopedias, atlases, lexicons, right? A whole bunch of different types of commentaries that exist, right? So, I mean, part of that process is learning what tools to use for what. You're going to have a lot of Venn diagrams, a lot of crossover between the different tools that you have at your disposal. And when it comes to biblical, answers, those are a lot of the types of resources you're going to be shooting for, right? And it's important that when you're trying to develop those answers, you're not just using one source that's biased to your position. If you're trying to be an honest intellectual, you're trying to look at the different angles and say, okay, let's say I'm a conservative dispensational evangelical. I'm not gonna only read books that look at things from that perspective. I'm gonna try to read things from the opposite angle, right? Let's say I'm a Reformed theologian. I'm not gonna just read that. I'm gonna read things from the other perspective, or vice versa. Whatever it is, the idea is you are looking for diversity in sources of information, right? But you are also trying to make sure that the sources you pull your information from are reputable, right? And so while I'm looking in terms of openness, I'm also looking in terms of criticism. So I'm trying to be an open critic or a critically open person, however you want to say that. I prefer the first, but that's part of the method. So understanding what the tools are, which for Bible, it's going to be that. Yeah, if it's something outside of the Bible, it's going to be all sorts of things. I mean, academic articles, but you'll learn pretty quickly that academic articles are not perfect, and then they're just as biased in it as anything else, and that unfortunately there's a lot of, in my opinion, poor scholarship that is done that somehow gets approved. There's a lot of reasons for that, and I've talked to a lot of scholars, so I have some insight into that, but long story short, just because it's an academic article does not mean it's right. And there can be some big blunders and obvious mistakes that happen there. So there's still that double checking stuff that we talked about, right? So when you're trying to develop these answers, a lot of what we said before still applies, right? You're gonna want to know these tools, but you're gonna need to double check everything, right? So you're looking for openness, right? I want to be open to other people's perspectives, but I want to think about things critically. So one of the most important tools isn't just a type of source, right? Like a type of book, but it's the tool of logic itself. And so when you're trying to develop answers, I mean, philosophy is honestly one of your best friends. And that goes for obviously everybody, not just Christians. I mean, it goes for humanity. If you want to understand anything, you need some basic understanding of philosophy. And I mean traditional philosophy. That's formed out of things like logic, math, and science. That's not just, well, I feel like, or, if a tree falls and no one hears it, right? And that people think of that kind of stuff with philosophy. It's like, no, philosophy, what does it mean? philo, or phileo, right, which is brotherly love. It's a form of love, and Sophia, which is wisdom or knowledge, right? So it's that you actually love learning and understanding and knowledge and wisdom, right? Philosopher is not someone who gets to sit around just making crap up, right? A philosopher is someone who loves insight, understanding, wisdom. That is the type of person that Proverbs describes, right? Book of Proverbs is constantly talking about, oh man, from the perspective of wisdom. I'm just trying to get these humans to listen to me. And anyone who does, like, that is a philosopher, right? So I'm trying to think critically. I'm trying to use the laws of logic to understand what's the law of the excluded middle. What's the law of non-contradiction? How do I use those first principles to analyze things like a syllogism, which is a major and minor premise with a conclusion, right? A lot of these things, they're coming from those old things I was talking about, writings by Aristotle or whoever, right? I want to actually think about things critically, and that's one of the most important tools, because you'll come across a bunch of commentaries that contradict each other, a bunch of dictionaries that contradict each other, because everybody has their different sources, and everybody has their different opinions. Now, for core things of Christianity, of course, everything's, going to get, those core principles are going to be there, right? But, and there's all these debates on small little words like a hapax legomenon, which is a word that only appears once in the Bible, right? Or once in any specific text, right? When you're looking into those kind of things, yeah, there's going to be all these opinions, and you're going to have to fall back on the first principles of logic. Understand what a syllogism is, and how do I examine this to know that this is or is not true. So one of the most important details when you're trying to develop the answers, just logic. And then, of course, like I already mentioned, knowing what those right tools would be which again, for Bible I've already explained, and for something outside of that would be a lot of these academic articles, books, and man, it's great if you can get out of your comfort zone and reach out and talk to a professor. That's a great thing to do. Most of the time, they're pretty willing to talk to people, right? They love what they do. That's a great thing to do. I've talked to professors around the world, and it's the best thing ever. It's awesome having a conversation with them and hearing their perspective, even if you vastly disagree. Those are some of the best conversations because it stretches you and grows you in better ways. Boy, that's a great way to develop answers, because it's when you contend with an idea that you understand it more intimately. What's that book? It's a novel. I didn't even read the whole thing. I think it's Ender's Game.
Okay.
There's this great quote. I'll see if I can remember it correctly. But he essentially says something along the lines of, in order to defeat my enemy, I need to know my enemy. And when I know my enemy, I love them. And then I no longer want to defeat them. And it's really interesting. It's something along those lines. And there's something to that. And I'm not saying, so the point is for me this person's my enemy, so I don't understand them. No, the point rather is that when you're contending with a thought, with a question, with an idea, right? And that's why I use the word contending, because there's kind of this tension, this wrestling with this idea. When I contend with it, I actually get to know it more intimately. I mean, when I've practiced like martial arts with some friends of mine, you're sparring or whatever, you get to know that person on a different level of intimacy than you do with other things. Right? You're seeing the way that they work, that they think. And it's not just true for people, it's true with ideas. Right? It's true with concepts. And so when you wrestle with it, what does that even mean? How do you wrestle with an idea or a thought? Well, look at it from each angle. Argue both sides, right? Jesus is the Son of God. What if he's not? How do you know? Right? And some Christians are like, oh my gosh, like how could you ask? How could you say that? Like, it's just a question. It's going to be okay. It's just a question, but it's an important question, right? Why? Well, we know it's important because it has a massive potential for change in your life, right? So I'm constantly trying to argue against myself. I'm constantly trying to play the opponent's role, the devil's advocate, right? Well, Seth, how do you know that's true? Well, did you really read that? Well, I know they claimed that, but have you verified that? Well, just because this might be true doesn't mean that this other thing is mutually exclusive. What if that's also true at the same time? How do you know for sure, right? So that to contend with an idea, with a question, with an answer, is to argue both sides, or maybe there's multiple sides. And oftentimes, there is, right? But one of those helpful things in doing that and for making that more systematic is using those rules of logic, knowing the law of non-contradiction, saying, okay, if I want to have a clear two-sided argument, then I need to have a clear claim, and then I need to argue the exact opposite by just adding the word not. It is true that this road is black. Okay, opposing claim. It is not true that this road is black. It has to be as simple as an actual negation, not a fake negation. So many people mess that up, right? The opposite of happy is sad. No, it's not. The opposite of being happy is not being happy. But people, they'll assume certain things are enemies that aren't. Everybody knows bittersweet's a thing. You can be both. And that's just one example, but we do this with things far more simple and far more complicated, where we assume things are mutually exclusive that are not. So understanding those laws of logic, those important first principles, we're able to think more critically and actually form clearer and more useful questions to contend with the idea and argue the actual opposite of that claim. And that is something I just don't honestly hear a lot of people talking about, but it's incredibly useful when you're trying to develop those answers.
Yeah. So for the person on the football team who's like, dude, this is way over my head. I just throw a big skin. But they want to serve Jesus and they want to help their friends work through these questions, but they don't really have that deep understanding of philosophy. What should they do?
Well, nobody's born with an understanding of philosophy. It's an important point to make. A good friend of mine, my boss, Derek Carrier, any football guy might have heard of him, right? He's been on several teams in the NFL, right? And he's one of the most intelligent people I know. It's like, you throw a pigskin, awesome. You can read books. There's nothing stopping you, right? And I know the heart of what you're getting at, which is like, this is intimidating, right? But what I want to say is that no matter what your background is, no matter what you do, no matter where you are, don't let where you are limit you from where you can go. Don't think that, well, it sounds too deep to me now, so I can't comprehend it. That's not true. You can comprehend it. It's just going to take a little work to get there. But you probably already know it's worth it. If you're thinking these things through, you probably already know that it's worth the hard work. If you're throwing pigskin, you know how hard work pays off. You know that it pays off to put in the extra sweat and blood and hours to say, I'm going to do this again and again and again until I get it right. Do that exact same thing. You have some of the most important skills of discipline, of motivation. Apply that same thing to this. You don't have to start out as a scholar. I certainly didn't, right? Just a curious person, right? Jump in with both feet, just like you did with football. Mm-hmm. Jump in, ask those questions, and it's okay. Just start wherever you are and take it one step at a time, the way that we already talked about it, right? And don't be intimidated. Whenever you meet a person, a word, an idea that you don't understand, seek to understand it. It sounds simple because it is. It's like, oh man, they just used the word, interpolation. Oh, I don't know what that is. Dude, literally just Google it. You'll learn it so fast. You're like, oh, gee, this is what it means now, right? Like, hey, Baxalagamenon. Wow, that sounds so intimidating. What does that mean? A word that's only used once. Congratulations, you now know what that fancy word means. It doesn't take long at all, right? But I think it's intimidating because we don't know yet, because we're uncertain, right? So no matter where you are, no matter what your background is, don't let where you are define where you can go. Just take that step. And, I love the example of the pigskin, because I'm like, those guys in particular, like you already have those skills. You have the taste of what motivation and hard work can get you. So use that exact same thing.
For those who feel like they don't have any sweat, blood, or tears left in the tank to give towards something, because this sounds like a lot of work. What would your encouragement to them be? Whether that's going back to what we were talking earlier about the impact that this has the potential for, or whether it's just an act of obedience or worship. How do you see the importance of this?
Yeah, I'll first start by saying, don't be intimidated by the work either. So I recently took up running because a friend of mine was like, hey, you want to do this half marathon with me? I was like, no, let's do it. Right. And so I started picking up running. I'm like, why is this so hard? I was a sprinter. I was not an endurance runner. Right. And so I'm like, man, this is exhausting. And I was so encouraged by my friends and a lot of these books I read and stuff where people were like, slow down. If you're pushing yourself too hard, slow down. This is for endurance. You're going to be okay. Just walk if you have to, just get to the end, right? And meet each goal. The same thing is true for here. You don't have to be intimidated by the intellectual prowess or depth. And you don't need to be intimidated by the work. Just learn at your own pace. I wasn't taking classes that forced me to learn it as fast as possible. I just learned at my own pace in a very leisurely, calm, and peaceful way. You know, it doesn't, those things don't have to be intimidating. As for motivation for why to do it, I think most people already know why they should, but I'll still give you, motivation, hopefully. The scripture, as a Christian in particular, scripture tells us to. Jesus prays and says, Lord, sanctify them in your truth. Your word is truth. Part of the sanctification process is growing in the knowledge of God through his word. And Paul says as much more than once, right? He's like, hey, you're called to more. You're called to increase in your knowledge of Christ, right? So motivation, if you're a Christian, Jesus told you to. That should be enough. But beyond that, it should be motivated out of, like anything in Christianity, it should be motivated out of love. I love God and I love people. And it's because I love God, I want to learn more about him. I want to understand him. And because I love people, I want to learn more about them and understand them. And I want to help them understand him. At Cornerstone, our mantra, if you will, is making him known. That's our mission statement. That's the goal, to make Jesus known to the people, because that's the Great Commission, right? Further than that, it's not just making him known, it's making disciples. And obviously that's part of what we do, but we're trying to sum that up in a pithy line. So, but that's important, right? It's part of the calling. It's a part of the process of sanctification, and it should be motivated by love, right? If I'm friends with someone, I'm motivated by love to get to know them, right? And if you're not, you're probably not really friends with that person. You're hopefully not, but you're probably using them or they're using you. I mean, it should be motivated out of love. And when love is at the core of it, well, let's be honest, a lot of that intimidation goes away. There's the rush isn't there, right? You're able to just do it because of love. And then you do it at your own pace. You take it one step at a time. And you do it every day because you love him and you love others.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that it's motivated by love, searching for these answers, because I would initially think that it tends to be motivated by fear. What if I'm wrong? What if Jesus isn't real? What if he didn't die? Like, in the fear of like that, but I guess that fear really holds you back. Because if you have that fear, it's like, well, what if I'm wrong? Well, I guess I won't look to find out. So that's a great point there. So coming back to these practicals of how do we develop these answers, we talked a little bit about why, but first off, use your tools. And you talked about, we have resources, first and foremost, the Bible, as Christians particularly, but also logic and philosophy and warring our ideas against one another. I actually had a quick question on that, on the warring our ideas. At what point do our doubts and questions become dangerous distrust of God?
Questions don't dangerous distrust of God. Conclusions do. That's a matter of coming to the wrong conclusions. People doubt, that's okay. So many Bible characters doubt, and they still make it, right? Doubt is not the problem. The wrong conclusion is the problem. That's dangerous, right? It's good for us to war with the ideas and say, well, what if I'm wrong, right? It's not beneficial to me when I come to the wrong conclusions. And it's easy to mishear what I'm saying. And, oh, so you're saying, unless you conclude the Bible's right, then, it's bad, right? That's not necessarily what I'm saying. Obviously, I believe that true to some extent, that because I believe the Bible is true, of course I believe that that's beneficial for you. Well, yeah, of course that lines up. But I would mean it either way. You can still apply that across the board. I mean, it really just comes down to when you come to a conclusion after warring two ideas together, what is what is the impact of that conclusion? Where is the power that you had now spent? Does that make sense? We have this potential energy, we have this power, potential for change. And now that I have the conclusion, that energy is spent on something, right? The ball has rolled off. And the question is, did I spend the energy correctly? And maybe that sounds overly philosophical, but it's important, and to those who have ears will hear, right? To quote Jesus. But as a Christian, right, I shouldn't be afraid to ask hard questions, because if I am, I will keep myself from a greater intimacy with Christ, right? I say this with the confidence of looking into it and knowing that it's true. And I don't just mean knowing that it's true in terms of it seems right and I've been convinced by pastors. I mean hardcore evidence, science, history, philosophy, logic, etc. And then I mean, on top of all of that, genuine personal experiences in the supernatural realm. I mean actual experiences where I've encountered God, where I've encountered the enemy, and I know that they're real from firsthand experiences. Not everybody gets to have that, but that's why I have such a confidence, because I've come to the conclusion from every angle, from the philosophical, from the mental angle, right, from the investigative angle, but also from the experiential angle, right? So there's just zero room for doubt for me now. But until you have that level of experience, which not everybody's blessed to, and so I'm very grateful for that, right? Until you have that, there's always going to be this room for doubt. What if? That's okay. It's totally fine to have room for doubt, right? And to have that luxury of doubt. But as we continue to war these questions through, right, there's an advantage, again, knowing that Christianity is right. The advantage of being right is that it's not brave anymore to consider being wrong. It sounds weird, but it's I know I'm on the right side. I know it's right. So of course I can ask those hard questions. That's not going to be dangerous. Why? Because I already know it's right. Now, if you're but I don't know that it's right, then is it dangerous to me now? Maybe, but only if your conclusions are dangerous. If your conclusion is, and it normally, honest people are going to come to the conclusion of uncertainty as opposed to certainty against, normally, right? Especially when it comes to something as simple as the existence of God. Why? Because philosophically, you can't prove non-existence. Proving non-existence is an impossibility, right? Unless it's based on pure definition, right? We've done that for a long time. So you're at a disadvantage trying to prove that God doesn't exist because you can't prove it. You just have to argue for it, right? So you're already at a disadvantage there, right? But this is a handful of reasons why you shouldn't be afraid, right? Because doubt isn't necessarily dangerous in and of itself. The questions aren't necessarily dangerous in and of itself. It's the conclusions you come to. And, how do I manage that? Just be careful when examining the conclusions. Follow the laws of logic. Examine the evidence. I truly believe that the danger is incredibly minimum. It's incredibly minimal. It's very small. The danger is more so when you are seeking, not when you're just I wonder if this is true or not. But when you're seeking something else, something other, and I see this in a practical example. I see this more so in people seeking things like Gnosticism, things like I want to be wowed by a novel concept I haven't heard and then accept it as true.
What is Gnosticism?
Gnosticism is it's actually a little bit more vague than people would like to think it is. But in general, it's this philosophy and religion where secret knowledge is the way to salvation. You have to, through finding and accessing secret hidden knowledges, secret truth, secret methodologies, whatever, that as I increase in knowledge and as I eventually want to shed myself of the flesh because body, physical is bad, spiritual is good, which that's not how scripture views it. But physical is bad, spiritual is good, knowledge is salvation. That's essentially Gnosticism, right? And there's a big movement towards that, even though it's subtle and not everybody would recognize that that's what it is. But it's because knowledge becomes king. That is God. God is knowledge, is essentially what it is. But not just knowledge in general, because it has to be the secret, sneaky knowledge. It's like it's the knowledge other people don't have, which is essentially what? You're seeking power through scarce knowledge. So just like there's power in questions that have potential for change, if the knowledge has potential for change, right? But other people don't have it. Now I have power other people don't have. It's like, well, that's just tyrannical. And that's just you trying to pull one over on everyone else. And it's certainly not a good thing. But we see that growing, even as a subcomponent of other religions. And it's a serious issue.
Yeah. So you would say questions become dangerous when the motives become distorted.
When the motives are wrong and perhaps when it's leading you towards a conclusion that would be wrong. But yeah, it's more so the conclusion. But yes, yeah. If again though, I don't think it's the question at that point. The issue is now just simply your motivation, which is why I'm still wrestling with the. How do I really define a bad or dangerous question? I have a hard time seeing that there truly is one. I think it's more so the things that surround the question than the question itself. But I could be wrong.
I want to pull up a passage real quick, and maybe you will be wrong. I will see how you handle this passage. But
Sure.
Let me pull it up really quick. So this comes out of James. This is James 1. I'm sure that you've heard it before.
Yeah.
But this is what it says. James 1, starting in verse 5. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. But when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty, or some translations say doubts, is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they are unstable in everything they do. It seems here, Seth, that it describes a doubting person or someone with, in the NLT, divided loyalty as one that should not expect to receive anything from the Lord, specifically wisdom. How do you reconcile that or understand that passage?
Well, first off, so it's not talking about asking questions. It's talking about a request, right? So there's two different, when we use the word ask, we can refer to more than one thing, right? So me asking you to please do something is not a question. I'm not asking, can you do that? I'm asking, please do this. Please give me this thing, right? So that's that kind of, it's a request. And the issue there isn't the presence of doubt, it's the lack of trust.
What's the difference?
Well, so the difference is this. So again, this is an assumption that the two are mutually exclusive. They're not mutually exclusive. Case in point, right? Famous verse, right? I believe, the Lord help my unbelief. Like, what? You're telling me you trust and doubt at the same time? Yes. And did Jesus, or did he not grant his request? He did. Why? Because the trust was present. Jesus just wants to know you trust him, right? He's looking for trust. He's not nitpicking for doubt. It's not like, oh, but I see a shred of doubt in there, so it's a no. how did James describe that person? Double-minded. It's at the point where it's 50-50. It's not a shred of doubt. Doubt is taking over, right? And more explicitly, I mean, it's 50-50 is being generous. It really is describing someone who just doesn't trust. There's like, I don't believe he's going to give it to me. And he's like, well, then why are you asking me? Right? And no, he's not going to answer a request if the person doesn't believe that they're going to give it to him. That's something he refuses to do. Because he's not in relationship with someone who doesn't trust him. Show me a healthy relationship without trust, right? So that's what that's talking about. It's talking about, hey, if you trust me, even a little bit, because trust and faith, try to distinguish the two, right? They're inseparable. They're not the same, but they're inseparable, right? And Jesus says, again, a little bit of faith, that's enough. God is like, a little bit of trust, that's enough. But if you don't trust me, but if you don't have any faith, I can't help you. And I say that with air quotes, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to help someone I'm not in relationship. Why? Because he wants you to learn to have it. It's just the same way when you have a child and you're trying to teach them, hey, don't go and touch the stove, right? Like how are you going to train them? Well, there's two different ways of doing it. Either you let them touch it, which is, that's the choice, or you slap their hand and say, no, if you do that, it's going to hurt, right? Just using words, the kid is not going to receive that, right? And so you're like, should I either let them experience the hurt on their own, or should I enact a punishment that will help them learn before they have to learn the hard way, right? And sometimes it's one way, sometimes it's the other way with the Lord, right? Whichever one is most beneficial. But this is part of that. He's like, hey, I'm going to elect. Is that cruel? Why would the Lord not grant the wish and give them wisdom? Because they need to learn. They need to learn that trust is more important than wisdom. Here you are seeking wisdom when what you should be seeking first is trust.
Yeah. To hit on what you were saying about how trust and doubt are not mutually exclusive, talking about that verse, I believe, but Lord, help my unbelief. I was thinking about a time I was driving, all right, and I can't remember if I left my phone at home or if it was dead, but I did not have maps. And there was a crash that happened on the road that I was trying to get on, and it's kind of a small road, so there's not many ways around it. But I remember at one time taking a drive a different direction to get back on that road to get to my destination. And so I just tried from memory to try and go that direction. And I start going, I jump the route that I know to my school, and I'm coming around trying to take this alternative route around the crash. And I start driving, and I have no idea where I'm going, just a general idea of the direction. And as I'm going, I'm like wrestling with these doubts of like, maybe I missed the turn, because I was flying past roads. I was just trying to rely on my memory to recognize it. And then I'd take a turn, get to the end of that road, be like, nope, this wasn't the one. Turn around, try and take another run. Oh, this wasn't the one. But I knew that there was a direction that way because I'd been it before. And so I was believing to get to that destination. And yet there were still all these doubts in my mind. But what I wasn't doing is I wasn't turning the ship around. I was still believing even through the doubts and the questions of like, what if this isn't true? What if I missed it? I'm not going to. And then I just kept going, kept believing, and then eventually ended up getting there. And so I think that that's so analogous to what my journey with Christ can be at times, where I believe, but Lord, help my unbelief.
Exactly. That's a good analogy.
So, coming back to the practicals, how do we answer these questions? You learn your tools. What's next?
For answering the questions.
Yeah, for developing answers to a question.
I wasn't sure if we were still summarizing the rest.
Yeah.
So we're talking about delivery now, right? Like methodology.
Still on like how do we develop the answers for ourselves?
So the developing.
Yeah. So what's
phase.
the step process? Can you just like condense it down? What are the steps to developing an answer to a question?
Yeah. So there's still a complexity to it in terms of it really depends on the question, right? So and that's why I hesitate to give it. It's 3 easy steps, right? But so the first one is going to have to be what the question is oriented towards. Is it a question about meaning? Is it a question about interpretation? Is it a question about some religious stance? Is it a question about science or history of that passage or whatever, right? So you first have to narrow your focus on what the question actually is, right? So once you have that is going to guide the rest of your process for generating the correct answer. Now that you have that, it's going to be clear what tools to use. I can't tell you which ones to use because I don't know what the question is, but based on what the question is and the direction you're going, it should be pretty clear to you which tools you're going to need to use. Once you know all the tools that are available to you, which is a previous step, you're going to have to learn what those tools are. Ones that, like I already mentioned for Bible, right? Dictionaries, encyclopedias, atlases, commentaries, all that fun stuff, right? So assuming you already know what your tools are, right? Knowing what your question is going to narrow which tools you need. So now that I've identified the question, now I need to identify the tools. And then I use those tools properly. Now, properly is a loaded word, right? And when it comes to biblical interpretation and getting the answer to what a passage is or means, that's the process of hermeneutics. I can't give you the 1, 2, 3 step. It's a complicated field. Why? Because it's filled with all the things I've already mentioned. History and archaeology and understanding culture. I mean, in general, right? In general, I mean, I'll give you a high level, right? And we're trying to understand a passage in particular, specifically with the Bible, right? Well, and this applies to any historical text, actually. You're looking for at least 3 types of context, right? So you're looking for historical, cultural, and literary context. So within chronology, at what point in time was this thing written, right? Maybe you know, maybe you don't. But that's going to influence big. With the Bible, we do. But so you have that. Okay, where is it written? I'm just realizing a couple people are going to think, well, what about Job? What about There's a couple, right? Okay, that are unsure, right? But in general, we know it's acceptable to know the era, right? Okay. So it's within this era, it's within this age, it's within this century. Once we understand the historical context, okay, so then this was the time period, right? Cultural. Well, where in the world was that? Right? And what were the cultural customs? Why is that so important? Oh man, because culture influences everything. So you're going to understand the words and phrases much better, right? When you're looking for an answer, oftentimes, so we're going to read something in plain English in the Bible. Languages are complicated, and we don't even realize how complicated we are when we're saying something, right? But we're constantly using idioms, right? And we'll say things literally that we mean figuratively. I just said constantly, not technically constantly. You can't possibly always do that, right? We'll use hyperboles. We'll use all these different forms of words and phrases that aren't literal, but are trying to convey a literal meaning. And so that in of itself can be tricky. But once you learn how it works, it really isn't. None of this process suddenly makes it to the point where how can we know anything? It doesn't do that. That people who say that just don't understand the hermeneutic process. But when we look at the historical context, the cultural context, to understand how that's going to influence what those words mean at that point in time, in that place, not where I live today, not the same thing, right? So at that time, at that place, right, within that culture, and then the literary context, which includes more than one thing. That includes, well, what's the rest of this passage? What am I reading here? I'm trying to look at from this spread across all 3 really, but what is this writing? Who wrote it? Who did they write it to? All these things impact it, right? So once I understand, I have all this context to finally work with, right? And then I'm looking at the context of, I'm not just going to take this one verse and say, this sentence means this, totally ignoring everything else. No, what's the sentence before? What's the sentence afterwards? Because that's normally going to give you the answer. I can't tell you how many times people are like, what does this sentence mean? And I'm like, read the next one. That's literally your answer, right? It's like people get so focused on one sentence that they're ignoring all the sentences around them. Like, that's going to give you your literary context. And then there's another type of literary context, which is really comparative literature. And few people go this far, but this would be, I'm not just going to read this letter from Paul in the New Testament. I'm going to read other letters from other Greco-Roman citizens from that area at that time. Now I'm going to read literature that's within a similar context, so it's actually useful. Otherwise, you're just reading something random. I'm going to read something from a similar context, and I'm going to analyze that. How did they use that phrase? Is that what they meant with that phrase? Because if I can develop a pattern where in general, people are using this phrase, and in general, they understood it meant this, it's a pretty dang good chance that's what Paul meant, right? Assuming that this is also applying to the target audience he was writing to. If, okay, well, the culture was saying this, yeah, but he's talking to this weird sect of weirdos over here who have no idea what that is. Well, you got to, dot your I's and cross your T's, right? So understanding the target audience, understanding the author, understanding comparative literature. If you check all that stuff, you're going to be really confident you have the answer, right? So much of hermeneutics is literally just researching to understand the context. But then the rest of that, it can be complicated in terms of how deep you want to go, how well you want to understand the linguistics of stuff. Like, yeah, it can get intimidating, but guess what? It doesn't need to, because scholars have already done this work for you. That's a nice thing. That's why you can get, 5 different commentaries, and now you have the result of hundreds of years of work or thousands of years of work of scholarship that you can stand on the shoulders of all those giants, right? So do you want to go all the way like I do with all that stuff? Go for it, right? But if that's too much, it's okay. People have already done the work, right? You can look at all these commentaries. You can double check it, right? You say, okay, these things seem to line up. Pretty confident this is the answer, right? Okay, I've checked this, I've checked this, I've checked that. I understand the context. I see what the scholars are saying. This makes sense. At a high level, that is what your process is going to look like, right? And if you want to know in more detail what that looks like, study hermeneutics, because there is more to it. And I just couldn't possibly give you all of how that works. But at a high level, you're looking at the context, you're looking at the basic linguistics, and there are great tools and resources that can give you that information. I mean, I'll just tell you right now, easy places you can go for free. blueletterbible.com. Boom. It can tell you what that Greek word was and what it means. You don't have to, wait for some scholar to tell you, right? It has a bunch of commentaries. You can use their commentaries. You could use BibleWebApp.com. Also a really great resource. Easily dig into the linguistics. Have the Greek and Hebrew right next to it, even if you have no idea what you're looking at. It'll give you a bunch of useful tools, right? The best one on the market is, which there is a free version of, which you can use, is Logos, right? Or Logos. It's app.logos.com. Pull it up. It'll instantly just let you start using it. You can get all sorts of information on there. That's what I use.
Yeah.
Personally, right? I use that all the time, and I've put a lot of time and effort into learning how it works.
And for those ChatGPT lovers, they just added a new feature. I don't know if it's on the paid only, but they have a AI chatbot now where it will search and scrub their libraries of resources and help you out there.
It's one of the few AIs I would trust for good information. I still double check everything, but yeah, it pulls from the library of books that you actually have purchased and have in there in Logos, and it's pretty great. It is for paid, but I think you have like 3 free a month, 3 like questions you can ask or something like that. So yeah,
pick your questions wisely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so developing answers to these questions. Number 1, learn your tools. Number 2, learn your question. Number 3, know the tool for the job. And number 4, use the tools properly.
Yeah, which is the hermeneutic process.
Okay.
Yep.
For someone going back to the person who might be intimidated by all this, they're getting asked a lot of questions, or even a pastor who's being asked so many questions constantly, and they struggle to find the time to really develop answers. Is there a time and place? And I know you kind of brought some criticism against this earlier, but is there a time and place for going to other people who are doing the same thing and looking at their answers and kind of maybe comparing, like, well, Frank Turek answers it this way, Wes Huff answers it this way, Bryce Crawford answers it this way, one more, Cliff Conneckley answers it this way, and kind of compiling from those and kind of looking at their resources? What is the place of using these resources that are more secondary that are maybe more like widespread communicators and learning from them?
Yeah. So it's similar to what I already mentioned with the commentaries. Technically, that's secondhand information, right? The great thing about that type of secondhand information is if it's a person, Wes Huffy's great, Frank Turek, great, Norm Geisler, big fan, right? You look at people like that, when they show you the sources, right? That's a huge time saver. They've already done the work. So when I say they've done the work, I mean they've done all the research. All you have to do is double check it.
Okay.
So the place is still there. Great. Wes Huff told me this. Awesome. How do I know it's true? Well, he's really good at telling you exactly where he got that information. Go double check it. It actually won't take that long, right? And so it's great for you just be able to be like, okay, here are these 5 trusted sources. I'm going to see what all they say. I'm going to check their sources. That's going to save me hours and hours of time. That's perfectly acceptable, right? Or, you can trust someone. It's okay to be like, in general, I trust Wes Huff. I'm not going to put the time into it. I'm pretty sure what he said was right? Just don't pretend that you know for absolutely certain, right? It's okay to be like, you know what? I'm okay being 95% sure Wes Huff was right about that. But just be honest about it, right? When someone says, well, is this true? Like, well, I don't know for sure, but this guy, Wes Huff, really knows what he's talking about. He has really good credentials, and he said this, and he's probably right. That's okay. You can say that, right? I'm just a big fan of be honest. Yeah, I hear a lot of Christians who are like, this is true, and I know it's true. Oh, how? I don't know. What?
I heard it on a podcast once.
Right? Wes Huff said it. Well, yeah, he's probably right, but do you know it's true, right? He'd be the first to tell you to double check. Man, he loves when people double checks, right? Of course he does. Any scholar worth their salt wants people to double check. I mean, even in the New Testament, Paul, right? Acts 17, the Berean Jews are there. They're double checking the stuff he says, right? And he's like, yes. He's like, you should be double checking everything I'm saying. That means you're an honest, out of good faith seeker of the truth, right? So that's important. So yeah, it's totally fine to say, hey, well, Frank Turek said this. Yeah, Frank Turek said that. And you could say, he's probably right. I trust this resource. Just be careful with your words, right? Because if you make some claim, it just happens for whatever reason, maybe they got something wrong. And that person comes back and says, oh, well, I can't trust anything you said because that person said that and it wasn't true, So just be careful with your words, right? As long as you're like, I can't remember, and I'm pretty sure this thing said that. No one's going to be like, oh, you misquoted it. Because you said you weren't sure, right? Let's just be honest, right? Be upfront, and it's okay to accept 95% certainty. It's okay to accept, hey, I trust this person. If they said it true, I believe them, right? And if someone says it's wrong, I'll be like, oh, okay. I still trust that person, but people get things wrong, so that's understandable. I'll examine the evidence. Okay, yeah, you're right. They were wrong about that. Okay, I'll let them know. That's it.
Okay, so now to moving to the conversation with somebody where they're asking you the question. So we talked about how you develop an answer to a question, or how maybe you shortcut the process a little bit and you just double check an answer that somebody else has already spent the blood, sweat, and tears creating. How do we enter into that conversation? How should we posture our hearts? Because you said it earlier, like, we're not just here to answer questions. It's something deeper.
Yeah, I have to do this every day. And I have to reposture my heart, especially when it's difficult people, right? It's so easy, like, oh, this lovely grandma is asking me, if this is okay or not. But it's another thing when you have someone reaching out you've never heard of, who doesn't know who I am. They just know who Pastor Gary is or whoever, right? And they're reaching out and they're like, this is why you're a terrible person and you're wrong. You're like, oh, I hope you're having a nice day too. Nice to meet you, right? You have to you do have to check your heart. Why are you doing what you're doing? And it should be out of love, right? And this isn't just apologetics, it's evangelism, right? When I enter into a conversation, I need to have the mindset and the heart set of, I am joining into a discussion with this individual with a joined goal, a collaboration targeted towards discovering and discussing the truth, right? That means the other person, simply put, isn't my enemy. And as long as you're not viewing that person as your enemy, as someone to prove wrong, right? It's remarkably easier to keep your heart in the right place and do the thing out of love. So yeah, you definitely want to check your heart and your mind. Say, okay, what is my goal in this? And as a believer, my goal is not just answering the question, it's loving the person. And what's loving the person? There's a bunch that goes into that. It's caring enough to get to know them and understand what their question is, what the context of their question is, right? Hey, can we take just a quick second? Why are you asking me that? I'm just curious. Well, actually, I'm asking because my brother died 2 years ago. Oh man, I'm so sorry. That's not a made up conversation. That stuff happens, right? You know, oh, well, is flat earth true? That's a really interesting question. What makes you ask that? Well, I don't believe in it, but my daughter does, and we've been having these blowout fights about it. Oh man, I'm really sorry that that's happening. Can I pray for you in your relationship with your daughter? That's a very different conversation than, no, flat earth isn't true, blah, 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 blah. This is why you're wrong, you know? Yeah. You're supposed to be, looking for what's on need, getting to know the person, love the person, understand where they're coming from. If you're talking to someone, you know, let's say you're a Christian and you're talking to someone who's a Muslim, right? And let's say they're getting aggressive and they're just like, this is why you're wrong and you're going to hell, right? Take a step back if you need to. Maybe you're already in a place, right? Hopefully you're in a good place, right? Take a step back and truly view that person as not a person to prove wrong, but a soul to be won over, right? How can I reach this? How can I understand why they believe what they believe? And that's going to frame all of your questions. Wow, I can see you're really passionate about this. What makes you so passionate about Islam? That's going to guide the conversation in a different direction. What makes you so, you're a really passionate individual. I can respect passion. I'm a very passionate person. What makes you so passionate about it? Well, it's true. So you're passionate about the truth. Yeah, I'm really passionate about the truth. Dude, me too. It just seems like we disagree on what the truth is. Are you open to having a loving conversation together to see what that truth is? Well, you completely reframe that conversation. That isn't you're wrong and here's why. That's, whoa, hey, let's join ranks and let's figure out together through logic and reasoning and evidence what the truth actually is. Most people will accept that. If they don't, right? If they really just continue to be hostile, and you can say, I love intellectual conversations. This one doesn't seem to be very fruitful. Doesn't seem to be beneficial. But I'd love to talk about stuff later, or if you have questions later, I'd love to talk about that stuff later on. Is there any way I can be praying for you? Right? You can just end the conversation that way, right? Maybe they say yes, maybe they say no, right? I've had people say no, right? Like, no, I don't want you to pray for me. Okay, well, I will, but you have a good day, you know? But yeah, the last thing you want to do is just manipulate this person into believing in Jesus. Yeah. That's not the point, right? Out of love, of course I want them, if I believe the building's on fire, of course out of love, I want them to know it's on fire and that there's a fire escape. Of course. Because I love that person, right? But I'm not going to get them to do that by screaming bloody murder at them, right? It's not going to help. So as a believer, as a Christian, the goal is not to manipulate anybody. It's not just convince them and prove them wrong. It's to do what Jesus actually told us to do, which is to love that person and getting to know them, understand why do you believe what you believe. And then if they're open to it, having an open conversation about whether or not the things that they're founding their beliefs off are accurate or not, and yours, right? You can open it up. Pick apart my faith. Go ahead, try. Like, all right, yeah. Well, what foundations do you see I'm saying is wrong? And it's like, oh, well, this, you claim this, but you don't really know that. That's a good point. I don't really know that, right? And you might have people rub in your face, I proved you wrong. You proved I don't know the answer. That's different. But you're absolutely right. I concede that. I'm going to go look into that, and we can talk about it later, right? It's okay. You do need to be the bigger man, because most of the time, people are really happy about feeling like they proved you wrong, or having a gotcha, or, oh, you thought for a moment, so they win the argument somehow. Or, they gave you an insult. Oh, so now they've won the argument, right? So people have weird definitions of success when it comes to debates. But when you're having a conversation with someone, and that's why I keep saying conversation, because it's what it's supposed to be. When you're having that conversation with someone, that's the goal. It's supposed to be that heart of love. You set that up ahead of time. You determine ahead of time, like, I'm not here to prove someone wrong. I'm here to love them, right? And as you allow that to guide your questions, it will naturally guide your answers, and the conversation becomes much more beneficial. And you know what? It's great. If you get to the end of a conversation, they proved a handful of things you said wrong. I have some stuff to go work on when I go home, right?
Yeah.
That's really useful. Hey, thank you for pointing that out. I haven't even looked into that. Normally they look at you weird. Like, what? Why did you just thank me for proving you wrong? Like, no, I didn't even think about it. That's such a good point. I'm gonna go research that. Thank you. And that should not be passive aggressive. That should be genuine. Why wouldn't I be thankful? You just exposed a blind spot. I get to go get better at this, right? So that love being the center is quite simply just the key to all of it.
That's great. And I think that is so important. Entering the conversations, not just trying to prove somebody wrong, but entering it with love. When do we not enter those conversations? When do we not even entertain that? Because I think that I'm so apt to jump in and be like, they raise a question and I just want to be like, I know the answer for that. I can help you. But I think at times an answer isn't what somebody needs. How do you determine the times when you go into apologetics mode and answer the question, and maybe when that's not the most helpful thing to do?
I mean, in general, even when you're unsure, the better thing to do if you're entering into conversations is to enter with questions, right? Not with answers. Because again, you're trying to help them to think the thing through. But if you're trying to decide, I mean, it's a tricky thing, but what you're looking for is it more beneficial for them if I jump in or not? Right? And in general, if you're considering it, you can ask pointed questions that will reveal that very quickly. Frank Turek is famous for asking the question, if Christianity were true, would you believe it? Right? There's very simple questions you can ask that will clear up real quick, right? Are you seeking the truth? Right? Or are you seeking to believe what you want to believe? Almost everyone will say they're seeking the truth. Nobody wants to admit they're just doing what they want, right? But sometimes they do. And it will be very clear to you, okay, well, I guess then it's not helpful for us to talk about it, right? But you can ask that. Maybe you're already mid-conversation. You thought it would be good. It's going in a bad direction. You say, hold on just a second. If I show evidence that something contrary to what you believe about this is true, what will you do with that information? Well, I'm not going to believe you because you're wrong. Okay, thank you. Continue. Okay, go ahead. I'll let you finish your piece, and then why should I, share that with you? Jesus handled this in interesting ways, right? The rich, young ruler. We already gave that example, right? But he talked to several people and would do similar-ish things where he'd say, people would ask him a question. He'd respond with a question, right? And he'd lead it a little bit, and then he'd let go. You know what he didn't do? Chase him down and say, you're wrong. Like the people who were trying to fight with him, he was never then trying to fight them back and prove them wrong, right? The Pharisees constantly coming up, they're giving him trick questions. You know what he did? He answered them. And then he let the conversation die. There's a situation, I forget which chapter it is, somewhere in Luke, where he is sitting down having dinner with the Pharisees, which everyone talks about how he sat and ate with sinners, but he did sit and eat with the Pharisees. He's sitting there and he's having dinner with them, probably a conversation, and there's this guy who's sick. And it says that people, they weren't talking, they were just watching. They're like, what's he going to do? And he heals the guy, of course, but he's like, is it okay for me to heal this person? He's being rhetorical, of course, but he's like, is it okay for me to do this? Like, wouldn't you, if you had an ox fall in a ditch? Of course, he's quoting Old Testament laws. It's like, if your ox falls in a ditch, right? Would you not pull it out? And he was just, he gave that pointed display of, before I do this, are you really going to attack this when you know that you would do the same, you would, quote, break the Sabbath for something lesser than a human being. And then what did he do? It says they said nothing. Jesus was good at sitting in the silence. And that's a really useful thing to learn. When you're having those conversations, or when you see two people, they're yelling back and forth, like, do I jump in? Hold on a minute, sit in the silence. And I would argue, pray. Hey, Lord, is this something you want me to jump in on or not? There have been plenty of times where I've heard people go back and forth, and they actually get to the end of the conversation. Both of them are wrong, and nothing productive happened. And I'm like, I didn't need to jump in there. I don't think it would have been received anyway. Now, that doesn't mean you just go around, well, I'm not going to share because no one's going to receive it. I'm talking about genuinely trying to discern and asking the Holy Spirit, okay, Lord, is this actually something that I should get into or not? Right? Will this be beneficial or not? Right? But if someone's looking for answers, if there's a genuine, like, it's not filled with hostility, I'm getting clear signals that this person is actually looking for the truth, or is even open to the truth. I'm gonna be all over that, right? Because that's what you're seeking, right? You're seeking souls who are open to the truth. But yeah, it's a pretty clear indicator when someone is fixated on hostility. The only situation where I would jump into that hostile environment is if that person needs an out, and I need to get them out of that situation because it might be potentially violent, right? Okay, I'm gonna jump in there for them, but I'm not expecting to have a fruitful conversation with that person if it's at that point, right? So in general, that's the guy that you're going to have. But the best thing there out of everything I just said is to pray. Okay, Lord, is this beneficial? Is this not? You tell me.
So what's next? How do we engage this person? What's the step process, if you will, for engaging someone in an apologetical conversation and answering their question?
Well, they ask it, right? Okay. So we jump into the conversation. Everything's based on the questions. So, it just depends on what they're asking. So, well, how do you feel about evolution? Oh, well, I don't think it's true. Oh, because you're a Christian? No, I don't disbelieve evolution because I'm a Christian. Actually, Darwin himself stated in a letter towards the end of his death, and this is something, I literally have links to this stuff on my phone, so I can always show people it's true. I'm not making it up, right? I'm like, hey, one of the last letters he wrote, he said that it's preposterous. He didn't use the word preposterous. He said absurd. It's absurd to think that you can't believe in a God because you believe in evolution. In fact, most of his life he was a theist, and he said that even though he left the Christian Orthodox faith, he's like, oh, I've been a theist most of my life, right? It's like, now towards the end of my life, I probably describe myself as agnostic. But he said, at no point in all of my religious fluctuations have I ever been an atheist, right? So it's like, that's an easy thing for me to bring up, right? Well, this is not contradicting whether or not there's a God, but you're right that the Bible describes something contrary to the evolutionary process. What I will tell you is, I absolutely believe in microevolution because that's been observed and repeated. Macroevolution has never been observed or repeated. So scientifically, it's just not science, right? Maybe that's upset some people, or maybe it doesn't, right? But it's true, right? Carry on that conversation, and what I'm looking for is, what are they looking for, right? If they're looking to see, well, these things contradict, then I'm going to address how they don't contradict, right? Or maybe it does. I'm saying, yeah, this is how they contradict, right? So I just address one way that they don't contradict and one way that they do with evolution, right? Believing in evolution doesn't mean you can't believe in a God, but believing in Jesus and what Scripture describes in Genesis does mean that we wouldn't believe in macroevolution. In fact, it goes out of its way, it's almost like it predicted it, to say that he made creatures and animals after their own kind, locking them into a kind and saying you get to turn from a rabbit to a bird, right? But then, of course, like, I'm going to try to address not just a kind of a high level of like, well, here's your high level answer, but I do want to, if I've already sought out the answers, then I'm going to have those answers to provide. And so I'm going to start with something a little bit more high level just to kind of gauge where the person is at, because if they're not interested, high level answer is better. Why? Because they're just going to ask something else. They didn't actually care. Or they're going to focus in on something that was more important to them in the answer, right? So it's okay to allow them to guide that conversation. What are they seeking, right? And then as they do that, right, assuming they're still actually quite curious about evolution and Christianity and why I wouldn't believe in evolution, then I'm going to reply a more detailed answer. Okay, here, let's talk about irreducible complexity. Let's talk about chapter 6 On the Origin of Species by Darwin, where he describes one of the core issues. He describes a bunch of his potential issues in his theory, but he literally has a chapter dedicated to potential issues, right? And in that, he says, well, if at any point it can be found that there is an organ that exists that could not be the result of numerous slight successive changes, my theory would absolutely break down, right? What he's saying in those words is, if it can't be a gradual, step-by-step, slight process after, he would describe it more as like millions and billions of slight mutations, not like a couple hundred, right? It was like a lot, right? He was like, it would have to take a long time. Then it doesn't work. This is the issue of irreducible complexity. If you have something that is irreducibly complex, meaning you have multiple things that are mutually dependent. So if I take one out, the cell dies, right? And we now know that is how cells work. Pull out the mitochondria, you don't have a cell anymore. It's dead, right? So there are different things that are, if I have an engine and I pull out a cylinder, the engine doesn't run anymore, right? Why? Because they're mutually dependent. And when we're talking about mutually dependent for survival, it logically, of course, concludes that unless those things can exist independently and slowly, incrementally, then the state A would never survive long enough to get to state B or C. Why? Because it was already depending on having A, B, C, and D in order to survive in the first place, right? And we now know irreducible complexity does exist on a macro and a micro and a cellular level, which is why I believe today that, if Darwin was alive today, he would be one of the strongest opponents against evolution, because by his own words and modern science, it's false. And it's that simple. I mean, we have all these fights and debates about it, but I'm like, just look at his own words. Like, I personally, a big fan of Darwin. Whoa, crazy. Christians can't say that. No, I'm a big fan of him as a person. Why? He was incredibly intellectually honest. He acknowledged all the potential problems in his theory, like a good scientist is supposed to, right? As far as I can tell, he was genuinely seeking the truth. He wasn't arrogant in saying like, oh, well, there can't be a God, there can't be this, there can't be that. No, he was just focused on the specific problem he was working on. He was saying, hey, I didn't come up with this, but there are a bunch of these guys, they all had these ideas. I think they could all connect this way. There are potential problems, but personally, I think it might work unless we find science that proves it otherwise. That's a super honest person, right? He was intellectually honest, and he was genuinely a student of science, and I appreciate that. And I would genuinely love to have a conversation with the guy, right? So I have nothing against Darwin at all. I probably like him more than a lot of evolutionists do, right? But I don't believe in evolution because, according to his own words and our now understanding of, even on the cellular level, how life works, it just doesn't hold up. So if you're able to have those conversations, you've done enough research, you're able to look at that stuff, quote primary sources, point them to it. Hey, look, I'll show you the quote right here, right? Like, look at it yourself. I'll send you the link, right? If you have that stuff ready, it's way easier to have those conversations, right? And it's that might be the extra step that I tend to take that is appreciated, where most people, say, yeah, but I read somewhere that that's not true. And that's not especially helpful. People, and they should, they're going to want to see the proof of what you just said. But if you play a game of show and tell as opposed to just tell off, right? Show and tell is not just convincing, it's actually helpful. It's beneficial, right? It's like, hey, I want to have, this is why I take notes. I want to have notes. I want to have this ready to go. So when I'm in a conversation, someone asks about it, I'd be, hey, good question. I actually have the answer for you right here. Here's the evidence. Here, don't believe me, right? I don't have a degree in this, right? I'm not a scholar. No, I'm just a dude, right? Don't believe me at all. I'm just saying this is what the evidence says. You tell me with the laws of logic, with the laws of science, how do you interpret this, right? That's how I try to go about those conversations. You have those three tiers, right? You have this, the refining what their question actually is. I kind of skipped that part because I mentioned it briefly earlier, but
Yeah, you mentioned it.
yeah, but you want to refine what their question actually is, because oftentimes they don't really know what they're asking. You refine the question is, and then you give them a high level answer, and then you invite them and open yourself up to, are you looking for more clarity or not? And not only will that save time, but it also saves unnecessary arguing, right?
A bonus tip: come with receipts.
Yes, you come with receipts, and that just goes for the top to bottom, right? Because sometimes the way that you're trying to refine their question, they'll reject some kind of thing you ask in your clarification. I'm like, what? I wasn't even okay, and and it's like, well, no, this is why I asked that, right? Like, so yeah, come with receipts, sources, and citations. Two of my favorite words.
Let's go. All right, so far we have talked about a little bit of your journey and why we even should think about answering Bible questions. We talked a little bit about approaching how do we develop those questions, or if we don't have the time to develop those questions, how do we find and double check those questions? And then we just talked through how do you engage people in conversation with these questions. I would love to play a little game real quick where I'm going to give you a common Bible question, and you're going to have 1 minute to convince me.
Okay.
So, first question. I'm going to get my timer ready here. My little Casio watch makes all the beeps and everything. So, in 1 minute, how can I trust the Bible?
Historically, scientifically, and philosophically. When we look at history, we see that everything supports the veracity of Scripture. It's a longer conversation, but that is the simple answer.
What's veracity?
Veracity is the trustability. It's the validity of something. It's that it's true.
Okay. So, like, further than that, like...
It's a long conversation.
What do
You
you
just
mean?
asked. You wanted a 60-second answer.
You still got 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, if you want to know whether or not the Bible is true, you can only get to the truth of an answer with something outside of the Bible using philosophy. So if you want to understand the Bible is true, you have to start with looking at whether or not infinite and finite exist. That's a longer conversation. Using the conclusions of what the definitions are for infinite and finite, we can come to the conclusion that a finite universe, which we scientifically know it is, has to have an infinite thing, because only an infinite thing can pre-exist that. So there has to be a God. Once that God exists, the question is if the Bible is talking about that God, which we know because the prophecies impossibly prophesy Christ.
Time. Good stuff. All right. Question 2. And you kind of touched on this a little bit with evolution and creation, but maybe taking a different direction. Does science disprove God? Ready? Go.
No, because science cannot disprove something that is beyond its aperture. Science is describing things that you can observe. You cannot observe an invisible God, so it's a useless tool.
You only took 15 seconds for that one. Do you have anything else on that where it's like, okay, well, what about like, how can I know God? Like, versus like an agnostic position.
How can you know? Well, the question is God knowable?
Yeah.
And is God knowable depends on the question of whether or not truth is knowable, because you want to know whether or not it's true that God exists, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we know truth is knowable because of the law of non-contradiction. To say that truth isn't knowable is a claim that you know that truth is true. It's self-contradicting, which means that the opposite is true. Truth is knowable. Now we know truth is knowable. The question is it possible to know that God is knowable? If the premise is God is knowable, then that truth can be known.
Boom. All right. The last one, and this one's going to be a little bit of a wild card because I'm going to hit you with a bit of a variable. And the variable is explain it to me like I'm in 6th grade. And the question is free will or predestination? Can you actually, off time, can you quickly define which each of those what each of those positions is.
Yeah, sure. Predestination, not just what the word means, but what people generally mean when they say that word is that something is predetermined. Destination. The destination is predetermined, right? So I didn't get to choose that destination. God did. Free will is I got to make the decision to get there.
Yeah, and what's been the big debate in the Christian circles about it?
People falsely assume that those things are mutually exclusive, and because of that, they think it's free will versus predestination. Well, either God chooses or I choose, right? And because of that, that leads towards a bunch of theological implications. So because those implications exist and people don't like those implications, people fight back and forth.
Okay. All right. Now that we've defined our terms, let's go.
Wait, say the question again.
Okay. Predestination or free will?
Oh, which one is true?
Yeah.
It's both.
Both? How is it both?
You know how your dad can say, hey, I don't want you to go into the road. Does he force you not to go into the road? Or do you choose not to go into the road? Well, either could happen, right? Both can exist. I can start running towards the road, or I can choose not to go towards the road. And whether or not I do, he can step in, he can scoop me up and pull me away from the road. He just imposed his will over mine, but it doesn't mean my will doesn't exist.
Still got 20 seconds. What does it mean? Like, does that negate God's sovereignty?
No, because he picked me up.
And turn me around and place my feet on. Good stuff. All right. Well, that was fun. Thank you for doing that. Can you walk us through really quick? Maybe just pick one of the questions. Can you explain how you were kind of following your process through trying to answer that question?
So of how to answer it quickly?
Yeah.
I had already thought about it.
Okay. So going back to what we were talking about earlier about how like somebody listening to this or how I could implement the procedure, I guess, earlier that we talked about of what were the 3 steps that you said about having the conversation? I know it was something, then going broad, then going specific.
Oh, those 3 steps.
Yeah.
Refining the question.
Okay.
Giving a high level answer and then a detailed answer.
Okay. Well, obviously we didn't have time for a detailed answer.
Yeah, I give you the high level.
So can you walk us through what you did there?
Yeah, so I wouldn't be able to do that if I hadn't thought of it before. Okay. How would I fit that into I have to sit there and think about a profound question and get an answer in 60 seconds. That would be really impressive if I could do that, right? But I can't, so it's not. I've already spent hours of my life sitting down and thinking through how do these things, which one's true? And then I realized it's not which one. Logically, because this is where we use the rules of logic.
This is talking about the predestination
free will.
Okay.
Logically, it's actually not hard to realize that the two are not mutually exclusive. And so I sat and I spent time and I thought of more than one analogy. That one I kind of came up on the spot, but it was like the other analogies I already thought of, right? Which simply a father can step in and use his sovereignty in the moment to override my free will in that moment. But it's not my free will, my ability to have free will. He overrode a decision. Why? Because he has the authority and the ability and the power to do so. He's my dad. So if I, as the father, go over and pick my child up, you're not going to say, oh, he removed their free will. Nobody thinks that because that's ludicrous, But they will recognize he's sovereign in that moment. He had the authority and the power to do so. So of course that doesn't negate God's sovereignty. You can't negate God's sovereignty. It's there whether you like it or not, right? And him having sovereignty is not mutually exclusive with me having free will. So because I had spent time thinking about that, it wasn't too hard to just give the answer there.
Yeah, great.
If you ask me a question I've not thought of, I guarantee you I won't. Well, I probably won't be able to answer it in 60 seconds. Now you're going to try to
think. Yeah. So for maybe students or, even adults who want to take this skill and bring it into their schools, maybe into the workplace, how do they start doing that?
With your friends and family.
Okay.
Yeah, start with your friends and family. Start in a safe environment, right? You don't have to start in a safe environment, but or maybe your family isn't your safe environment, but maybe they're ruthless. I mean, I love my family. We're super sarcastic and sassy with each other, and and it's great. And I'm actually blessed. We do pick each other apart in a good way. You say something like, "That's not true," because X, Y, and Z. You're like, oh, yeah, good point, right? But we're refining each other. And what is awesome is if you get at least one, if not multiple friends where you can do that together. Have a safe environment. I have a couple friends. We do this all the time. We'll meet and we'll have a conversation. We'll just say safe zone, and you jump in and you just go, crazy claim. When Jesus said this, it means this. And they're like, whoa, weird. I don't know if that's true. What about this? Well, you're right. And then we just start throwing ideas around. You're wrong. We're just joking with each other, but it's like, it's a safe environment for you to try those things, right? And to have one person, actually, I do this. Well, you know this, you've been there, right? Where I'll meet with people and we'll practice apologetics. We practice conversation, because when you start practicing, you start realizing real soon, it's just not as easy as you thought it was. You're not always going to have a quick answer. And maybe someone says something intimidating. You're like, oh, I guess I lost. What? No, just ask them to explain what they're saying. Like, you don't have to just all of a sudden concede that they're right because they said something smart. You don't have to understand what they're saying. Ask them to explain, right? So we practice things like that. And that's a safe environment to do so, where I act as the bad guy or the person accusing, right? Like, oh, well, your faith in Jesus is wrong, and here's why. And I'm going to give you hard to dispute claims, right? I'm going to pull up all sorts of facts and words you've never heard before so that you can get used to being intimidated by things you don't know or understand, and being able to keep your cool, be calm, be loving, right? And ask that person to explain those things. And what you realize is you don't need to have all the answers to help them find the truth. You just need to ask them the right questions to help them think it through. Okay, well, how do you know that's true? Where did you get that information? Have you verified that information? Does that satisfy the laws of logic? Do those things line up? Are you sure those things are mutually exclusive? Right? Asking those things, helping them through. I don't have to be an expert on Buddhism. I'm not. Like, I know a handful of things. But when I'm not an expert on all things pagan either, but I've had long conversations with pagans. And we talk for hours, right? And that's not because I'm an expert in paganism. I was just asking questions, right? And helping them think things through. Well, how's this? What's that? What's that? Right? And I've really enjoyed those conversations, right? And as far as I understand, we've both enjoyed those conversations. Why? Because we're both being loving and respectful in those conversations, seeking to genuinely understand what the other person believes and why, just like we were saying the goal was. So simulate that intentionally. Get friends and family and say, hey, this is the goal. Are you up for doing this with me, or to help me grow in this way? You'll probably find at least one person, if not maybe a couple people who are like, wait, this is really cool. I want to do that. And then you create this safe environment where people are able to hone that skill, practice it, and sharpen it. Before you know it, you're going to be begging to go out and talk to people.
Let's go. So what then do you do when you don't know the answer to somebody's question? Or in the same way that you're talking about, oh, you piece apart their position even if you don't know. What if they start doing that to you and you're realizing, oh, shoot, I have a faulty foundation here? What do you do then?
Yeah, so there's a handful of things. I mean, one, that's why you should be doing that ahead of time, and why you should be choosing your words very carefully, right? And so I try to do that all the time, and I do it with my friends, right? So someone will say, yeah, well, we know this about God. And I go, well, to be perfectly technical, if you say that, you're opening up the conclusion you're at is true, but the premises you used don't necessarily lead to that conclusion. So if you say that, someone's going to say, not technically, and then they'll assume your conclusion is false, even though it's not. And so knowing that actually leads into the other part of the answer, which is when someone says, oh, but your syllogism, the structure of your logical argument, is faulty, now I'd say, oh, you're right. The structure of the logic is wrong. Let me reframe the structure of the logic. It'd actually be true if I say it this way. And they're like, oh, okay, good example. But maybe you don't know. Maybe you don't know how to restructure it, right? And you're like, you're right. I did say that wrong. I wonder if it's this or if it's this. And you can start throwing out ideas. What do you think? If it was this, would that make sense? If it's that, would that make sense? Explore with them. If they're not open to exploring, then okay, you don't have to, right? You can just say, that's a really good point. I'm going to have to look into that more. Or if they just straight up ask you a question, how many books are in the Bible? And you don't know, right? And it's like, I don't know, 63, 66, right? But like, well, what about, this? What about, but they ask you, let's say they ask you a question you don't know, right? How many authors is it exactly? Well, roughly 40. Well, what do you mean roughly 40? How many is it really? Well, it depends. I mean, I could give you that answer, but let's say I don't know that answer, right? Well, I don't know. I've only heard people say roughly 40. Oh, so you're just assuming that based on what other people said? Yeah. That's a good point. I'll have to look into that. Or they ask you a question you have no clue, right? Like, what does it say in this exact verse? And you're like, I don't know. Just be perfectly honest. I don't know. I haven't memorized that, right? That's okay. Why would you lie, right? If someone asks me, I do this all the time. My friends are like, oh, you're supposed to have all the answers. What's this? I'm like, I don't remember. Right? What do you mean you don't remember? Isn't it your job? My job is to look it up, okay? My job is to double check, all right? Yeah. I can't memorize everything, right? Or it's, well, what's this? Well, shouldn't you know that? I would love to know that. I'm going to go find that out right now, right? Like, but it's perfectly fine. Just say, I don't know. In fact, it's the best thing to do because anything else would be a lie.
Yeah.
Well, not anything else. You could say, I'm not sure. I would guess that it would be something along these lines, and that's fine. Right? You can say, I'm not sure. I haven't looked into that. I would guess, right? Or if I were to speculate, if you were to force me to estimate, I would think it would be something along these lines. And sometimes that's satisfying for people. It's enough for them to be like, okay, that could make sense, right? And they're like, but I can look into it. What I love doing, if it's someone in my life that I'm going to see again later, ask me something I don't know. That's a great question. I have no idea what the answer is. Do you want to meet up and we can dig into it and figure it out? Not only is that honest, it's relationship building.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite things to do.
Let's go. So, I don't know is an acceptable answer sometimes?
100%.
Wow. That's revolutionary.
Crazy.
You can say, I don't know.
It's okay.
When you don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what I've found is like having a follow-up to that is important as well. Like, I don't know, but I can talk to this person. I can send you this resource. We can go out for lunch and dig into it sometime.
Yeah. If you're curious, there's actually this great book on this topic, right? Well, this thing happened in Revelation. What does that really mean? Oh, you know what? I'm not sure, but here's some good commentaries, right? Harvest Handbook of Bible Prophecy, great book. You should check that out, right? Yeah, stuff like that. Point them to resources. It's a good part.
So, last question. Talking about the internet and the information age. How has this
the misinformation age?
How has this influenced apologetics, this field, and also like personally, like impact how you and I dig into apologetics? Because in some ways it seems like the barrier entry is so much lower, but in other ways it's become so much more convoluted. If that makes sense? It
can, yeah. It did to apologetics what it did to everything else, but apologetics benefits more than a lot of things. Mm-hmm. So I'll explain both. That it did what it did to apologetics, the same thing that it did to everything else. I said that wrong, grammar. But that thing is what any revolutionary piece of technology does, which is it took all of the things that tool could be applied to, and it exaggerated it. It made everything easier and more powerful. So anything that related to sharing information and accessing information blew up. And that means good and bad things, because there's damaging and hurtful information and there's really beneficial information. So things, when we have revolutionary technology like AI, things get better and worse at the same time, because all it is it's just exaggerating whatever the issues already are. Right? So same thing with apologetics. The thing is, even the downside for apologetics, I would argue, is an upside. Why? You're exposed to more information. The only problem is you. That's the best place you want to be. You want to be in a place where you're the only thing in your way. Because there's all sorts of information, but it's up to me to determine what's accurate. To use the basic laws of logic, all the things we've already talked about, right? I can now access wisdom from thousands of years for free. That's insane, right? Not only that, but I can hear all of the arguments against not just what I believe, but everything else. I have access to everything good, bad, and in between. And because of that, I can see really bad arguments for why you should follow Jesus. And I can see maybe a handful of really good ones, because a lot of times people just don't make good arguments, right? But you're able to see that, you're able to witness it, and you're able to see people pick each other apart. And that's so useful. You can learn things the easy way. So I would argue, well, yes, it can make things convoluted. It's up to you whether or not you leave it convoluted, right? Because when you're seeking the truth, when you have those tools of logic, when you have the research tool, research skill, that enables you to sift through all the madness and be completely unaffected.
Do you ever argue with AI trying to prove God to it?
Not God. I've argued all sorts of weird things with AI. I've been like, prove me wrong. This monster is real. And it's like, you're just wrong. And it will give me all this stuff. And I'm like, but what about this? And it's just fun. And that's a good point. That's actually, that's a really good use of AI. Why? Because AI is it's not actually thinking, right? Contrary to a lot of popular belief. Mm-hmm. But what it is useful for is it's a large language model. It's a linguistic tool. And it is the summation of the knowledge and conversations of and on the internet, which means you can essentially debate the entire internet in a conversation. That's kind of cool, right? And while it doesn't mean it's going to be accurate all the time, it certainly isn't, and it's horrible at history. But if you ask a random history fact, sure, it'll be fine. But if you ask, well, give me the sources and citations, it's horrific. It's terrible. It's so bad. Gemini maybe is a little bit better with some things because it actually does Google searches, but it's just telling you still what the internet thinks. What the internet thinks is not what's true, right? So it takes a lot of double checking to get AI to be useful when it comes to actual historical research. That part bothers me. I hope one day it gets good at it. But as for talking, brainstorming, practicing those debates, that's actually a great tool.
Well, Seth, thank you so much for sitting down and having this conversation. I hope that it was edifying and applicable for anybody who is listening. I know that I took a lot of insight out of it. Would you just pray us out and thank God for this conversation that we've had together?
Let's do it. Lord Jesus, thank you for this awesome and edifying conversation. We pray that anything that I said that was stupid, you would just get that out of people's ears, Lord. We pray that you would help all of us have grace with each other, that we would help us have love for one another. You'd help us to seek the truth no matter where it leads, Lord. Pray that you would give us the words and you give us the wisdom as we try to have loving conversations with others and share the truth and collaboratively work together to find out what those truths are. Lord, I pray that you would bless everybody listening to this now, that you would pour blessings over them and over their family for generations. Lord, I pray that you would continue to guide us and that we would glorify you with the things we say and the things that we do. In Jesus' mighty and matchless name, amen.
Amen. Let's go.